After giving this game another chance and another playthrough, what am I to even think? Chapter 6 and the ending of Danganronpa V3 put into serious question whether series creator Kazutaka Kodaka is God's gift to visual novels and a writing genius, or a completely overrated hack that struck gold in 2010 and has simply milked the franchise as hard as he could. Welcome to Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. To call this game divisive would be an impressive, almost stupendous understatement. This reputation, paired alongside a rabid but passionate fanbase, makes approaching this game a very laborious task. The mere mention of this game is met with unending vitriol by those who absolutely despise it, and equally met with ceaseless acclaim from those who find it brilliant. From the title of this video, it'd be real easy to assume I fall under the camp of rampant negativity and hate towards this game, but that's not so much the case. I decided to replay the entire game and write an analysis on it, and after giving the game another shot, the results are honestly surprising. I found that I've actually changed my tune on a lot of things about this game, which is shocking considering I have my own checkered history with this series and this game in particular. In fact, before I even started this project, I was so sure the end result would be a 1-hour circle jerk where I would just hate on the game and give it a low rating at the end. But what actually ended up happening? After another 40-hour playthrough re-experiencing this game and writing down notes, and a solid 2 weeks of writing, research, and reflection, I've come to realize Danganronpa V3 deserves an actual deep dive, not another self-serving, one-sided opinion piece. There's a lot of nuances people don't take into account when discussing this game, and I genuinely think through the process of creating this video, I formed a much more mature and well-thought-out opinion on this game overall. So throughout this analysis, I truly do plan on being as fair to Danganronpa V3 as I possibly can, because this is not a slander piece nor is it a praise video. I'm going to discuss just about anything and everything. And since this is a video game, that means gameplay, music, voice acting, everything is on the table. I'll obviously give more time to more important stuff, but you get the gist. I spent a lot of time researching this game's history, its development, and how it came to be. This is going to be a long video. I respect this game and think it deserves my absolute attention to detail. January 17, 2017, Spike Chunsoft and Kazutaka Kodaka released one of the most contentious visual novels of all time. I'm going to spend the next couple hours analyzing it, giving it a formal rating, and ultimately answering a simple question. What makes Danganronpa V3 such an infuriating experience? My Class Trial, Our Class Trial is the title for the opening chapter in Danganronpa V3. This chapter is a beloved one amongst fans of the series, and for good reason. It's laden with remarkable twists, controversial elements, and a trial result that quite literally affects the rest of the game. This is Danganronpa, so you already know what's happening. We have 16 students trapped in a school and they're being forced to play a little death game. Each time someone is killed, there's a trial. If the murderer isn't caught during the trial, they win and everyone else is executed. Nothing too complicated. Pretty normal. After the prologue and our introduction to the cast, we see the student attempt to escape the school through a path named Death Road to Despair. It's a gauntlet-style tunnel that severely hurts the students in their attempts to traverse it. Their several attempts end in failure, with members of the group accusing our main character, Kaede, of pushing them too hard. Following the events of the Death Road to Despair with a cast of students that are still averse to committing a murder, the next day Monokuma provides the First Blood perk as a motive. This First Blood perk allows whoever commits murder first to leave the school without a trial. A day passes with no murder being committed, Monokuma gets a little bit more impatient and adds a 48-hour time limit, declaring that if there is no murder, he will kill everybody. With this new time limit in place, students take different passive action towards confronting this motive. Some decide they are going to fight Monokuma, others sort of accept their death, but Kaede and Shuichi set out to catch the mastermind and outright end the game. Shuichi the previous day had found a secret moving door in the library that led to a mysterious looking room. Under the assumption this is a room relating to the mastermind, Kaede and Shuichi set up cameras in the library and a sort of alarm system with the help of Miu to try and catch the mastermind in the act. Fast forward to about 1 hour before the time limit, there's a lot of commotion and movement towards the library, you hear the alarm system go off, one thing leads to another, and well, you know the rest of this story. For the most part, this is a good opening to the game. It doesn't rest on its laurels or try to get away with being boring by relying on the fact that it's a tutorial case. Its ambition causes it some problems, but even then, I'll go as far as to say it's my favorite opening case in the series. I think the motivation for killing Rantaro made a lot of sense on Kaede's part. Kaede felt a shit ton of guilt for having forced everyone to go through the tunnel multiple times only to achieve nothing. She was trying her best to be a positive force for the whole group and keep them together, to not delve into the killing game. But perhaps desperate and overzealous, she concocts a plan to kill the mastermind and ends up murdering Rantaro instead. This chapter does Kaede very well. Even with hindsight and knowing what she did, I replayed this chapter and felt nothing but positive feelings towards her as a character. Kaede clearly has an almost ignorant level of optimism she puts forth, and she tries to maintain positive interaction with even some of the most unsavory characters in the cast. Doesn't matter if it's Miu being a cunt insulting her breast size, doesn't matter if it's Maki being an antisocial freak, Kaede is just a genuinely good soul trying to keep up a facade of happiness in the most grim of situations. Even when we investigate from her POV, she puts forth 100% effort into catching the criminal while fully aware it's her. I love her interactions and her little romantic moments with Shuichi, especially this beautiful image of her holding his hand. But if we're going to discuss Kaede, I do have a couple of things I really need to get off my chest. I both hate and love the twist of this chapter. I know this is a Reddit tier opinion that everyone already holds, but I can't bring myself, even upon a second playthrough, to be okay with this twist. Don't get me wrong, my frustration doesn't lie in the fact that it turns out the real murderer was the protagonist. In fact, I don't hate that actual twist in and of itself. My problem lies in who took up the role as the murderer. Simply put, I didn't want Kaede to be killed off. If the roles were reversed and Shuichi took up that role as the person who gets killed off, I would have been perfectly content. To be honest, on my original playthrough, I actually hated Shuichi. But after replaying V3 for the purpose of this video, I've changed my tune. Now I actually like him. His character arc is pretty satisfying. I'm glad I got to play as him. But even then, I really wanted that female protagonist with a bubbly, naive, but hopeful personality. Sure, Kaede is a sort of fucking airhead, and in a lot of ways a Sayaka 2.0, but I was interested to play from her POV, and that kinda got ripped away from me. Nowadays, I'd say I'm pretty content with Shuichi, but it was pretty disappointing to get another dark-haired, typical timid protagonist for this game. He's not bad, but it's rather obvious why so many were disappointed at this twist. It's not that the twist is bad, it's that I really wanted a switch up. A point of this chapter that never sat well with me is the murder. You see, we learn in chapter 6 that the entire verdict reached in chapter 1 is bullshit, and that Kaede was actually innocent. I have mixed feelings on this, because when I originally played this game and even on second playthrough, I distinctly remember how fucking stupid I thought Kaede's murder plan was. It relied way too much on luck for me to ever take it serious. Her plan depended on the victim standing perfectly in a position where the ball would hit his head. Who's to say the ball doesn't just hit his toe instead? What if Rantaro runs away from the flash or doesn't go toward it immediately? What if Kaede doesn't angle the ball properly at all? How could she possibly know
or test how long the shot put would take to roll down the vent. She never actually practices rolling down the shot put or practicing for the murder. And even with her being an unreliable narrator, I find it difficult to believe she would have practiced for this murder and we just wouldn't have noticed. Now, you will tell me that the 6th case invalidates every single complaint I just made, and I'd agree. In fact, in the grand scheme of things, none of what I said matters. Which is sort of a bittersweet feeling for me. My feelings went from, wow, this murder plan is dumb as fuck and can't work, to realizing, oh wow, it didn't work and we lost the prototype I really wanted to play as. And there will of course be a couple people who say I only wanted Kaede as the main character because I wanted a girl as the main character. And even if that was the case, why is that a problem? While it is very clear that I want Kaede for more reasons than she's a girl, I don't think that's a problem even if I did want her only for that reason. I don't know, man, I've been alive for 22 years and I haven't had that many female protagonists to play as. I think it'd be pretty cool to have a female's perspective or experience in a video game every once in a while. I will concede that my grievances with Kaede's murder plan are almost entirely based in me seeing that I don't get to play as her. I will admit, that's a fault in my criticism. Another thing about this case that really gets under my skin is the motive. I can actually get behind the first blood perk itself. It's a great idea for both practical and narrative reasons. What I cannot really get behind is the time limit imposed by Monokuma. You see, the first blood perk actually works for 2 reasons. Not only is it a good method for coercing someone to start the killing them without forcing them, it also ends up causing tension and biting Kaede in the ass when she actually does kill Rantaro, because she can't even use the perk because of guilt. The 48-hour time limit, however, that doesn't really work for me because it's kind of lame and forceful. Murder someone or you all will die is a pretty lazy way to go about it in my opinion. Now, anyone who's friends with me might immediately chime in here and call me a hypocrite. I love Danganronpa 2's 4th case, and that one has the infamous starvation motive. Yeah, the starvation motive is basically a variation of kill someone or die, but it feels a lot less forceful and it ends up serving the narrative better. Without getting into too much detail, it's better because you can see people losing their minds and declining over the lack of food. People get desperate, and we see the effects it has on characters we've known over the time of about 4 chapters. But what separates 2-4 from 3-1 is context. In a vacuum, both motives aren't good. 3-1 is worse, but 2-4 isn't good either. However, 2-4's motive is saved by the actual culprit. Gundam Tanaka isn't some soy boy who did the murder to save everybody. Gundam was equally okay with letting everyone die if they didn't fight back and discover he did it. 2-4's motive isn't good on paper, but in the context of Gundam, it works out really well.
Pride, conceit, courage, insolence, fearful of nothing, daunted by nothing. Let us laugh uproariously! That is Gundam Tanaka! I shall stick with my evil until the very end! Open sesame pandemonium! I shall fill hell with true hell!
Someone simply being told, hey you're gonna die in 2 days, isn't interesting at all. If Monokuma says something like, murder someone in 3 days or the first blood perk will expire. Or if he did anything creative to put pressure on the students, I'd have liked it a lot more. But here, we just have this really forceful and bullshit way of going about things, and it's not very entertaining. In terms of the actual trial, I don't have much to say in the negative or positive direction. It's basically a tutorial trial, and it's a serviceable one at that. I do enjoy the trial, but it's not noteworthy if that makes any sense. Out of all the trials in the game, this is the one I probably have the least to say about. It's well done and serves a good setup for Shuichi's development and Chapter 6's retrial. Even with all these criticisms I've made of the case, I don't think any of this makes or breaks the case. At most, the worst complaint I can really levy against this case is that the mastermind cheated. But newsflash, that's not much of a critique on my part. If anything, that means the game is doing its job. I should be mad. The game robbed me of a character I really wanted to play as. With all that said, this is one of my favorite chapters in the game. Not necessarily one of my favorite trials like said before, but this chapter is an emotional roller coaster. The game takes away the most positive force in your group of students, it forces two seemingly good people to die, and everyone in the academy is forced to cope with the fact that at any moment their lives could be cut short too. Above all else, what really makes this chapter special is the beginning of Shuichi's character development. During this case, we find Shuichi repeatedly struggling and suffering because he refuses to formally accuse Kaede. His brain is just repeatedly flashing back to his childhood trauma and how he got a man convicted. Shuichi is scared because Kaede is unfairly asking him to relive that same trauma. He doesn't want to tell the truth again. He recognizes the nuances of the world and realizes that sometimes good people do bad things. He's definitely afraid to be the person to get them to be punished. He already has childhood trauma and scars holding him back. But now Kaede being the culprit? This might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's simply too much for him to handle. But that's the beauty of this case. Our protagonist takes the first step towards facing the truth, just as Kaede asks him to. Detective or not, he needs to confront the truth, no matter where it leads him, no matter how much it may hurt him. Seeing Shuichi go through the beginning stages of this character arc is what makes the ending of Chapter 1 so special. Shuichi makes a promise to Kaede. He promises he will believe in himself. He promises he will face the truth. And he will face that truth not just for himself but for everyone around him.
I believe in you, so you should definitely believe in yourself.
Yeah, I'll try. I don't know if I can do it, but... No, I'll do it. I have to believe in myself. I won't be afraid anymore. I will face the truth for everyone. I won't give up. For your sake, Kaede. I promise. From the bottom of my heart, I promise you, Kaede.
Yep, that's our promise. I'm leaving everything up to you, Shuichi. Goodbye.
The second chapter of Danganronpa V3 leaves me rather disappointed, and that's sad because this starts off as a relatively good chapter. We open up to an ominous cutscene of a memorial for Kaede, with voices alluding to her being murdered by a mysterious group. This scene is then followed up by Gonta discovering strange letters written on the ground that spell out Horse A. When everyone gathers in the dining hall, Monokuma and his cubs give the students 4 items which can be used to unlock new parts of the school, with many of these new areas including student research labs. Curiously, Maki in particular refuses to let anyone inside her lab, casting a lot of suspicion on our ultimate caregiver. The students find another flashback light, with this light forcing them to recollect the memories of the ultimate hunt, an incident Rantaro alluded to before he died. The next important event in this chapter involves the Monokubs dishing out the motive to each student's room. This motive happens to be a video of the most important person in each student's life and what has become of them. Interestingly, Monotaro completely fucks up handing out the motives and ends up giving people the wrong motive videos. This little mix-up of motive videos leads to disagreement within the group as to whether everyone should view their motive videos or not. Later on in the chapter, Kokichi, being the little bastard that he is, lies to Gonta that everyone in the group hates bugs. Gonta then spazzes the fuck out and attempts to kidnap as many people as possible to get them into his research lab. It's a relatively goofy segment, but plays an important role in the case, with Kokichi using the time frame to steal and view as many monopads as he can. In this chapter, we also get a little subplot with Angie, Himiko, and Tenko. Himiko has, for whatever reason, decided to convert to Angie's religion, and Tenko accuses Angie of brainwashing. This brainwashing isn't important now, but it will be in the next chapter, so let's keep that in mind. Moving on, Angie has this absurd idea that living in the school forever is actually the best choice, because that's what her god Atua has told her. In order to convince everyone, she teams up with Himiko to put on a magic show. The goal of this show is to entertain everyone and show how great their lives in the school can be. For Himiko's trick, she's meant to escape from a water tank in 1 minute, with bloodthirsty piranhas being dumped into the tank if the 1 minute goes up. Now, anyone who's played Danganronpa knows exactly what's going to happen during this magic show. Okay, I'm bored now, so let's actually talk about why this case drives me up a wall. But before we do that, let me get the one positive thing out of the way. The motive for the chapter? Fantastic. Having motive videos get mixed up is a great writing decision, and it makes me love the motive way more. The idea that people could be trading motive videos leads to a lot of suspense and mystery as to who could be motivated to commit the inevitable crime for the chapter. And since it was an arbitrary fuck up that caused this mix up, who knows who has whose motive video? It's one of the more intelligent decisions with writing during this chapter. Now, I'm not foolish, it is hilariously coincidental that Kurumi got her own motive, but I think that's a bit of a non-issue and a Cinema Sins tier complaint. Sadly though, this chapter is full of issues. The biggest issue for me is that this is the most boring chapter in the game. The investigation isn't very entertaining, and the actual trial is a slog to get through. The investigation is especially boring because nothing really sticks out, and the more you progress through it, the faster the mystery and intrigue behind Miroma's death just dissipates. By the time the trial rolls around, I don't really care about the circumstances surrounding his death. My only remaining motivation to get through the trial is to actually figure out who did the murder. It becomes really hard to care, and oh man, does the trial feel like it drags on, especially if this is not your first playthrough. The trial just can't hold your attention because so much of it is fucking wasted going over 1 + 1 = 2 level of argument and deduction. It also waffles around with a lot of time being wasted, with Himiko refusing to reveal her magic trick and having everyone accuse her of the murder. And you would think this chapter would be very careful of handling its actual suspect, because said suspect is our last real motivation to give a shit about this case. But no, we don't even really get that, because for some reason, this case decides to do the thing where the suspect speaks up a bit more than usual or hints to you that they're involved. Now, to be fair, I didn't go about counting how many voice signs this culprit had. For all I know, this could be inherent bias just due to my replay of the game, so take that last point with a grain of salt. But you know what truly sucks about this case? The Blackened themselves, the culprits. My biggest gripes in chapter 2 lie squarely at the foot of the murderer, said murderer's motive, and how the chapter concludes. Another sticking point for many people is how the actual murder is committed, but for me, this goofy ass murder method and completely botched cover-up are but a footnote to my rant. To begin, I really hate how this chapter concludes. Listen, there have been a lot of interesting motivations for murder in this series. We are playing Danganronpa after all. Some people kill for the most stupid and inane reasons imaginable. I'm not foolish enough to pretend otherwise. But something about Kurumi's motivation in particular drives me insane. And I personally think it's one of the worst motives in the entirety of Danganronpa. So, Kurumi Tojo is the ultimate maid. Her entire personality is that of a mom figure. She's extremely competent and gets things done correctly. She does anything she's asked to do and does it pretty well. Kurumi is in fact so hyper competent that she gets jobs working for high-ranking government officials and leaders. But it doesn't stop there. Not only does she somehow get hired by the fucking Prime Minister of Japan during a time of crisis, she's so effective at her job that she actually becomes the de facto leader of the country.
When Kurumi gets her motive video, she realizes that she has to escape the game at all costs because it turns out she's the Prime Minister of Japan and the people of Japan need her. Let me make this clear. This is one of the most inane and out of left field premises I have ever encountered, ever, even for Danganronpa standards. I am playing Dangan fucking Rampa, but this particular plot point is so fucking stupid that it managed to actually break my suspension of disbelief. But even if I am to ignore the absurdity of this, that's not what drives me the craziest about this situation. No. What drives me mad is how Kurumi responds to the situation and her behavior following Shuichi's formal accusation against her. If you're watching this video, I am under the impression you either watched a playthrough or played the game yourself, so you know exactly how this murder went down. And you know Kurumi took advantage of the fact that Ryoma was depressed and no longer had a will to live. Kurumi kills the man, gets caught, the entire cast ends up voting her out, and then she immediately decides to start spinning a narrative of how she can't die because Japan needs her. She manipulates the values of a room full of Japanese people to make them feel pity for her in that situation. She's fully aware that most people in this room have friends and family that live in this country. She does all this in an attempt to manipulate and convince one of them to take her place in the execution. And scarily enough, this manipulation is working up until when Kaito promptly calls this out for the bullshit that it is. And after getting called out on this, she attempts to run away from her execution while everyone cheers her on and encourages her? I get that no one wants her to die because the killing game is brutal and evil. But does no one see how insane this is? This woman was about to kill all of you, and right now you're cheering her on. And there isn't even a consideration for the guy who was actually a victim in all this, Ryoma. She took advantage of a suicidal person who felt crippling loneliness, and even after her plan failed, she still wanted to sacrifice another person in that very courtroom by tugging on your heartstrings. It's one thing to have Kurumi be a terrible person, but it's another thing for the cast to display this level of tone deafness concerning it all. I know there will be defenders of Kurumi's strict utilitarianism, but that's all ultimately bullshit in my eyes. Kurumi does what she does for ego. She does it because she's the ultimate maid, and every second she spends not serving the country as a blight on her ability has the ultimate maid. Portraying her as this selfless individual is hilarious if you even take 5 minutes to actually consider some of her actions I mentioned earlier. I guess I forgot to mention this during my earlier diatribe, but she also voted for Shuichi out of spite. No other reason. It feels like the game is trying really hard to portray Kurumi as this sympathetic villain, when in my opinion, anyone who acts like this much of a manipulative sociopath has no place getting any sort of empathy. Most certainly not from the cast members. You can never get the same treatment or same level of sympathy of a Gonta or Kaede. Kaede committed a murder purely to save everyone in the group, and when it became very clear to her what the truth was, she didn't really fight back. She accepted her role and died. Kurumi, as we had discussed earlier, lied to the bitter end, gaslit the group afterwards, and didn't even take the punishment with dignity. One final nail in the coffin, but this goes without saying and everyone knows this is the truth. Kurumi is just uninteresting and piss boring. So yeah, even if you disagree with everything I just said, this single point is the truth, and you're gonna have to accept it. And I said this was just a footnote, and I didn't want to even include it in the script or the video, but I have to say it. This murder method and cover-up is so fucking stupid, because all she needs to do is drown Ryoma, and she doesn't get caught. All she needs to do is drown him, and she doesn't get caught, but she does this entire setup, and it makes no fucking sense. Like I said at the start of this, Chapter 2 is boring as fuck. Shitty investigation, doltish murder method and cover-up, repetitive dull trial, and a lackluster culprit. There really is nothing to write home about this chapter. Well, on the bright side, it's not like it can get any worse, right? Right. right? Hello my friends, and welcome to one of the worst chapters in the entirety of Danganronpa, and to this day, probably my least favorite ever. Chapter 3, Transfer Student from Beyond the Grave. After we ended off Chapter 2 with our favorite bastard Kokichi exposing Maki's actual ultimate talent, her being the ultimate assassin, the gang goes to a research lab to see weapons hung all over the room, confirming his accusation. Unsurprisingly, this news sows some distrust amongst the group. However, they don't really have a lot of time to dwell on this as another floor has been unlocked, another flashback light has been discovered, and there is a new motive on the horizon. Particularly, the flashback light contains a memory of a funeral for all 16 students. When you pair up this fairy tale alongside Kurumi's desperation to save Japan, the group becomes very worried about the state of the outside world. Mana then presents a new motive. One of the 4 students will be revived using the Necromonicon in Korekiyo's lab. Yes. This is a motive for some reason. Meanwhile, my best girl and favorite manipulator Angie then becomes a pseudo-cult leader and successfully brainwashes the most susceptible students to her religion, taking advantage of their state of despair thanks to all the murder and unease. Angie once again declares that staying at the school is for some reason the best option, and she goes as far as to form a student council. These guys go on to start enforcing curfews while blindly praising this Atua nigga they just figured out about days ago. Angie turns herself into a mob boss of enforcers, and it's kind of hilarious. Oh, and these morons actually want to take advantage of the revival motive. Wish I could make this shit up. During this chapter, we also unlock a paranormal floor in the school where the murder definitely isn't going to happen. The 3 mysteriously empty rooms, these mean nothing. The computer room, that could never mean anything. Korekiyo's new laboratory with only 2 or 3 clickable items, one of them being a katana. Nope, just a coincidence in my humble opinion. The all-white and pristine-looking artist laboratory of our recently inducted cult leader couldn't possibly be the scene of a murder. The student council plotline just fucking happens. I do understand Angie is purposely targeting the most vulnerable amongst the group, that much is clear. My issue with this fucking student council arc though is that, like I said before, it just happens. There's not nearly enough build-up or hints to it. It just arbitrarily happens and you accept it. Angie's a manipulative and power-hungry piece of shit. There's a lot you could have done with this. Angie gets hilarious levels of hate amongst fans for being the annoying Atua girl, but she's genuinely one of my favorite villains in the game. She takes advantage of some of the most vulnerable students, also she can claim power over the school, while using religion to keep her subjects in check. This is actually a pretty dope idea and concept. It's just kinda sad that outside of a couple frames of Angie hugging people, the build up to this council shit is just non-existent. One of the biggest problems with this chapter is that the concepts of subtlety and mystery are just foreign to this chapter. I know I gave chapter 2 shit on this specific point, but chapter 3 is on a whole different level with this bullshit. Holy fuck, who the fuck saw a room full of wax effigies and thought it wasn't going to be a crime scene? Who the fuck saw 3 empty rooms, realized they wanted to perform a ritual in one of them, and didn't immediately realize a murder was going to happen? And then it gets even worse. At least our first murder of Angie had some mystery to it, because anyone could have gone into Korekiyo's lab and used his katana to stab Angie. I mean, besides Monodam purposely eating the key to Angie's lab and making it extremely clear someone's gonna die in a locked room mystery, there's still plenty of room for intrigue here. But do you know what is the most obvious and boring murder setup of all time? The fucking murder of Tenko. Nah, I don't I don't think there is a more obvious, oh yeah, this nigga is gonna die moment than in this fucking case. She is lying down in the most vulnerable position I have ever seen in my life. She is inside a fucking cage. That cage has a sheet covering it. There's a 175-pound furry statue on top of said sheet, and this entire ritual is being performed in the fucking dark. If you don't think this bitch is gonna die after this entire setup, you must have known one of the 4 people on the planet who actually thinks Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. And not to mention, how the fuck could anyone think the murderer is anyone besides Korekiyo? He was the one who pushed for this bullshit seance harder than anyone else, and to top it off, he had unbelievable levels of influence and power over the situation, to the point where it's almost comical that the group went through with the dude's seance idea at all, especially after seeing Angie already died. I know it's standard practice for the Danganronpa cast to collectively obtain the Darwin Award and occasionally all decide to do a really stupid activity together, but deciding to go through with this one in particular is mind-boggling even for this group of Looney Tunes. Also, concerning Tenko's murder, I just don't buy it. The actual murder method used to commit the crime is just stupid as shit. The seesaw effect is something I can get behind, right? What I can't fathom is the idea that no one in the dark room noticed the sound of Korekiyo walking, that not a soul heard his voice approaching a different direction, and that no one noticed his voice stopping as he stepped on the seesaw. Like, you ever find yourself tiptoeing around your house at night so your parents don't hear you? I mentioned such a scenario because it proves my point. All these sounds Korekiyo made would have been audible in 90% of situations. It's only amplified by the fact that he finds himself in a worn down, old and wooded room. I refuse to accept no one heard this shit. And I know I said I can get behind the seesaw effect, but even that situation kinda baffles me. Namely the idea of the pick being at the top of the cage. Even now, to this day, I can't find myself believing this. First off, did no one watch Korekiyo while he was putting the drape over this cage? A body was discovered minutes ago, yet our cast are this aloof and unattentive? Another issue I have is, when the dog statue was being placed on top, how is there no clanking noise or some sort of bulge/aberration in the sheet to give away the fact that there was a pick underneath it? You also dare have me believe the dog statue just peacefully placed on top of this pick, no wobbling or noise to give away that there was a pick underneath it? And supposing we ignore this, let's just face the very real possibility that how likely is it the plan was going to even work? What if Tenko is unreliable and moves herself and the rock? What if she gets struck in the wrong spot? I also take issue with Kibo's memory printing for 2 separate reasons. Number 1, it may technically not be an ass pull, but they sure did manage to make it feel like one. The only hint we get towards this mechanic is the scene where Miu definitely isn't totally sexually harassing Kibo. I don't blame you if you didn't know how to interpret this scene, but apparently this is where she was giving him some upgrades. Which of course included his flashlight, which was used during the investigation, and the image printing that was never explicitly mentioned before it was absolutely necessary in the final trial. I find it extremely hard to believe Kibo never felt the need to mention the specific upgrade up until during the last possible second. I will concede that there's no way he could have known it ended up being useful later on, but during a life or death scenario, a guy like Kibo is definitely giving up all the information he can, but for some reason, he says nothing about this particular future. The real reason he says nothing is so the writers can shock us later in the trial as he throws him the Hail Mary to Shuichi and saves the day, but it feels cheap. The other problem I have with Kibo's memory printing is the implications it has on the story from this point forward. From this point on, both Kibo's robot nature and Miu's ultimate talent are going to become useful tools to push the plot in whatever direction it needs. I'll get to my rant on Miu's ultimate talent later on, but for now, there are several problems with Kibo. Just suddenly giving Kibo this sort of power necessitates a couple things, and now you must contend and fight back against the possibility that you have now written yourself into a corner. Now, every crime that gets committed has to either have Kibo as the culprit or have him so far removed from what has happened as his memory printing is too powerful of a tool. They also need to immediately kill Miu off the next chapter because the longer she sticks around, the more the audience might ask, why won't she upgrade Kibo some more? Every case could be instantly solved if we just upgraded Kibo.
And ironically enough, even with Mew being killed relatively quickly, the upgrade issue rears its head again in Chapter 6 anyway. After losing his antenna, Kibo simply walks into his lab, upgrades his equipment, then begins a relentless assault on the entire school, jumpstarting the events of Chapter 6. This trial also upsets me because I feel like there's a level of missed opportunity. I mean, sure, this child fucking sucks as is and there's not much that can be done to save it aside from making a new case altogether, but if there's one thing I distinctly remember being disappointed by in my first playthrough, it was the revelation that both murders are committed by Korekiyo. You see, when Monokuma arbitrarily decided that only the first murderer would be the Blackened, there was an opportunity to make this case substantially more interesting. Could you imagine if we did the trial, figured out there was a second murderer, and we just couldn't do anything about it? Do you know how many tense and narratively interesting things we could have gotten out of this? To knowingly have a murderer amongst our cast? It's one thing to have a member like Ryoma or Maki, but a guy who actually killed a cast member just chilling amongst you guys? Please tell me I'm not the only one disappointed that we didn't get something like that. That would have done so much more for the story than Korekiyo's lame-ass 100 friends motivation. Oh yeah, this motherfucker. I have not forgotten about you, you disgusting piece of shit. Korekiyo is one of the most disappointing and pathetic villains in the entire series. I genuinely don't think I hate a motive more in this series than Korekiyo's. The despair disease was a pretty stupid reason to make Mika a murderer in Danganronpa 2. Celeste simply killing because she wanted money is pretty simple-minded, but it was believable and not as bad a motive as people make it out to be. Even Kirumi killing because she thought she needed to defend her nation. That felt out of left field, but it made sense. But Korekiyo? He's a dude who was in an incestual relationship with his now deceased sister, and he murders teenage girls so that she has more friends in heaven, with his overall goal being to get her 100 friends?
I loved her so deeply, and she loved me so deeply. The fact that we were siblings meant nothing to us. They called it forbidden
What?
love, but none could stop the
Bro,
love
what are
we
you talking
shared.
about, man?
This is what we were waiting for? We lost 2 people instead of 1 for this? We lost a potentially interesting plot point for this? We lost our time for this? Do you have any idea how disappointing this is after the events of this chapter? Specifically, during this chapter, we literally have a cult pop up in the form of a student council. Simultaneously, here we have Korekiyo, the ultimate anthropologist with a vast knowledge of societies and cultures. You would think with all this knowledge, maybe his motivation would have been to stop what he saw as a cult forming around Angie. With all his studies, he has surely seen dozens of cults and seen how they can devastate entire groups of people. This doesn't have to be the exact motive, but surely there's an alternative to what we got here, right? But no, his actual motive is just incest. I'm not fucking saying my boring motive would have fit better into the outlandishness of Danganronpa, but I am saying we could have done anything else but this. It's not clever, it's not endearing, it's not even entertaining. This type of absurdity just leaves a bitter taste in my mouth because it makes 2 rather important deaths just make me go, really? That's it? It's especially insulting because it feels like a complete waste of Angie in particular. I know the majority opinion in Danganronpa discourse is to shit on Angie relentlessly, but she doesn't really deserve it. Angie's annoying and two-faced nature are what makes her fucking great. I like her for the same reason many of you might like Okichi. She's a good villain, and it's kinda sad we had all that potential wasted for Korekiyo's Alabama fantasies. And you know what, same goes for Tenko. Now to be honest, I fucking hate Tenko with a burning passion, but it's also equally sad to see her just die in this fashion. I mean, I understand she served her role as the sacrificial lamb to Himiko's character development already, and Himiko actually ends up being a base girl by the end of it all, but once again, I find it pretty sad she died because of this sister fucker. It's actually rather impressive how much this chapter feels ruined by this one single plot point. No, seriously, think about everything in this chapter in relation to the incest thing, and you'll see what I mean. When you see the dead bodies, when you think of the wasted potential, when you see the dumb investigation, all of this was for what exactly? This chapter? It fucking sucks. It takes the worst traits of Danganronpa and amplifies all of them. Borderline unrealistic murder methods? Check. Hilariously stupid motive for the murder? Check. Boring investigation? Check. Really obvious culprit? Check. Students acting stupid for plot convenience? Check. Outlandish to a fault? Check. I'll never forget when I convinced my ex-girlfriend to play V3. She had played the first two games by herself, but when we started dating, I really wanted her to go through V3 just so I could laugh at how the game made her feel. I don't think it's coincidence that after this chapter, she never actually finished another chapter in the game. I know I've been pretty negative so far in this video, but let's switch things up a bit. I like to give credit where credit's due. Chapter 4 is actually my favorite chapter in this game, and features one of my favorite Danganronpa cases. This will probably come as a shock because all my friends who know me will remember how much I hated this game and shit all over V3 when I first played it. But I genuinely mean this is my favorite case in the game. While this chapter does have some low points, its high points shine far too bright for me to place this as anything but my favorite case. Chapter 4 greets us with the most ominous and mysterious chapter opening yet. We are shown a video of the deceased Rantaro discussing the killing game to an unknown audience, claiming that said audience wanted this killing game. We also get a scene of Kokichi seemingly conspiring with Monokuma to make the game more interesting. This chapter, Monokuma presents our crew with a flashback light that forces them to remember a world-ending disaster befalling the outside world. Memories of the Gopher Project and an attempt to save humanity are invoked. New items are given to the group which open up doors to the new floor. Among the rooms on the new floor include Tsumugi's unimportant research lab, Shuichi's research lab filled to the brim with poison that I'm sure will not play a role in an upcoming case, and a mysterious locked door no one can access. Meanwhile, Miu informs the whole group that she has a plan to escape the killing game. The computer lab, previously unlocked during the previous chapter, has a killing game simulator which Miu has modified to remove all weapons. No one is actually interested in being in this virtual world long term, but Monokuma baits them into investigating it because of the proposal that there might be a hint of the outside world hidden within it. The whole group decide to investigate the virtual world, and come to find it's very limiting and also has a strange set of rules. During the investigation of the virtual world, the group split into two parties, one searching the mansion and one searching the church. Of course, some strange events and Danganronpa tier shit happens. A virtual body is found lifeless in the snow, and once everyone removed their headsets, they're horrified upon seeing what we all knew was coming. Now, before I get into what I really love about this case, I'm gonna quickly just get the bad or questionable shit out of the way. First off, this has nothing to do with the actual case. I just don't know where else to put this. What the fuck is it with Kodaka and incest? Why am I witnessing mono-cub incest? Why is this an ongoing joke in this chapter? Like, this is an actual negative against the case. I am just so mind-boggled as to how this franchise keeps bringing up incest or fucking your family members and just does it so casually each time. The Monokubs are fucking and one of them got canonically pregnant. I'm losing my mind. Anyway, back to the actual criticisms I have. Problem number 1, Miu suddenly becoming a murderer. Listen, there's a lot to say about Miu. She's a loudmouth, she's the fake slut every guy hates because she never puts out, she's crude as hell, she has a massive ego for someone whose invention resume includes hookup counter and a going commando gun that teleports underwear. However, I can't really believe Mew would so brazenly attempt murder. I guess my issue is that I can't get behind the justification that she felt the world needed her invention, so she murdered someone. Why is it Kokichi she decides she needs to kill? I might have done bad research or something, but I have no idea why she chose to kill him of all the people. And in all honesty, it sounds like a terrible choice considering his specific nature. I see Mew as a massive coward who just happens to occasionally have tendencies towards arrogance. So while I do believe she would have the guts to do all this in the New World program primarily because she'd be in full control, the idea that her motive is really as simple as just wanting to get out really bothers me for some reason. There doesn't seem to be a trigger event or anything that truly makes her decide to go full steam ahead with this. I realize this specific point is very up for interpretation, but something about it just doesn't feel right to me. Also, the Neo World program, I think it kinda sucks. Like, it's not offensively bad or anything, but it's not a very fun area to be in. It comes across as gimmicky, but I'm not too mad we were forced to deal with this, because it being a video game world actually made this chapter a bit more interesting. Oh, and one final thing that's always bothered me about this case, I think it's an unbelievable level of cognitive impairment on the part of the students to dismiss Mew throwing the sign down the river as nothing but a mere prank, while being fully aware that this is a world she programmed and has overwhelming influence over. It's almost case 3 levels of stupid, where the writers just sort of make everyone dumb and unsuspicious of others for no discernible reason. Now here comes my undying praise. Case 4 handles obviousness much better than in Case 2 or 3, on several fronts. While it is pretty obvious that someone will die in a way that relates to the killing game simulator, it's infinitely more interesting because of the nature of the fact that it's a virtual world. There's gonna be certain rules and gimmicks to work out because of the fact that it's a video game. It's also rather obvious that Mew will attempt a murder during this chapter, because similar to Krakio in Chapter 3, Mew has unbelievable control over the scenario she has put the students in, and arguably she has even more control than Krakio did. But the story completely upends your expectations by making Mew the one who dies instead. This is a lot more mysterious than what was done in Case 3. This case is also great because even when it becomes abundantly clear to you who the murderer is, by the very nature of it being Gonta, it makes it hard to believe. Even on my second playthrough, I found myself wanting to give Kaito that it was impossible Gonta could have done it. With Krakio, I didn't doubt he was the murderer for a second. With Gonta, it's not hard to believe, but it is difficult to accept. A result so difficult to accept that both playthroughs I voted for Kokichi instead of Gonta. This case handles Gonta being the culprit extremely well. He's the second murderer in this game to actually have a decent motive. Not only that, they keep the trial entertaining because he has no idea he did the murder. But meanwhile, Kokichi repeatedly yells and pressures him to admit it. I love the decision to have Gonta fuck up plugging his headset in, and having him fuck up his own memories in the process. It's 100% believable because it's Gonta and Gonta's a dumbass. This case just gets so emotionally exhausting because it's painful having to watch the kindest person in the game succumb to their inevitable fate and execution. I've seen people shit on Gonta by declaring him nothing but another generic gentle giant character, but this time with the spin of him being dumb. Yeah, so what? Gonta is the GOAT. He doesn't need to be different or special. He does his job and he does it well. And staying true to his character, he did the murder because he wanted to save everyone. Yes, he was manipulated into doing this, but who else would fall for that? Sorry, but that just perfectly matches up with the character we know. This is the Gonta we know very well. I've seen some people complain about the Shuichi circle jerk that takes place during this chapter, but I think a lot of people have missed the point of it. In fact, it's one of the most brilliant writing decisions in the game thus far. It's done very purposely. Remember how much of a coward Shuichi was in Chapter 1? He had zero confidence in himself and was definitely afraid to convict a good person who committed a crime. He felt bad for the man in his backstory, and he felt bad for Kaede. But part of his character development was getting over this hump. After 2 cases of outing someone who was obviously villainous, here we arrive at Chapter 4. By now, everyone believes in Shuichi and is encouraging him to solve the case, but this time, he's confronted once again with telling an uncomfortable truth. He has to publicly convict the sweetest person amongst the group. He has to break the worst news possible, all while the person who manipulated Gonta is smiling like a freak. Shuichi has dreaded this moment. He's gotten lucky the past 2 chapters had terrible people as culprits. Right now though, he has to deal with the same problem that absolutely stunted him in the beginning. But this time around, he has to convict the most innocent member of the group. He has to do it in front of the group of people who trust this culprit the most, and he has to deal with the backlash of said accusation. The students praising Shuichi is actually brilliant. It puts Shuichi on a pedestal. He's viewed as this infallible detective who saves his friends. What's so smart here is that the game decides to knock Shuichi off his metaphorical throne with the realization that Gonta is the murderer. Shuichi is reminded once again that his sacred search of the truth won't always yield happy results. And when Shuichi makes his accusation against Gonta, that same group of people who praised him to begin with are now gonna lash out at him. Specifically, he takes a lot of shit from Kaito, who was very irrational over the course of this trial. But most importantly, we have to discuss Kokichi. This character actually peaked in Case 4. This chapter pretty much cemented him on my Mount Rushmore of Danganronpa V3 characters. The way Kokichi spends the entire trial toying with everyone is just fantastic. Here we have Kokichi, the biggest liar in the entire game, up against his biggest ideological opponents, Shuichi and honest man Kaito. For the first time, Kokichi is the one with all the power. He knows almost the entire case inside out. He uses the trial as a sort of way to troll everybody. He simply doesn't care. For Kokichi, this is kind of like a game, a perpetual liar versus a perpetual truther. When Shuichi cheats in the game by deciding to tactically tell a lie, Kokichi gets pissed off and actually decides to confess the entire crime. And holy fuck, what ensues as a result is some of the most difficult moments in the entire game. The trial gets super heated, with at some point Kokichi, still bitter about Shuichi cheating, even goes on to directly continue his beratement of Shuichi, declaring that suspecting and blaming your friends is just what a detective does. He knows Shuichi hates every moment of this but can't argue back. He knows Kaito's stubbornness will clash with Shuichi's objectivity, and he relishes in every moment of it. And after Kokichi successfully forces Shuichi to implicate Gonta and deduce that there couldn't be a single other possible culprit in this trial, Kokichi drops what might be one of the coldest, hardest lines in the entirety of Danganronpa.
You get it now, right? That's the truth we were all reaching for. The thing you guys wanted so badly! A truth without any lies! Yu Iruma's killer is Gonta Gokuhara!
The delivery of this dialogue sends chills down my spine. The music that accompanies this is menacing. Kokichi's voice actor is giving it his all. The sound effect that accompanies the ghoulish sprite of Kokichi is perfection. For me, this is the apex of Kokichi as a character. Kokichi may have not outright won the killing game, but in terms of ideology, he managed to finally make everyone in that room understand one thing. The truth can hurt you just as bad as any infinite number of lies he can spin. Fast forward to Gonta's execution and the end of the trial. We see Kokichi emotionally rocked over Gonta, only for him to follow it all up with a sociopathic speech about how he didn't give a rat's ass about Gonta, and he once again plays up this villain role in the most gruesome way possible.
Huh?
I don't want to, stupid head!
Kokichi!
Oh man, did you fall for all that fake crying? You're so dumb! I would never cry for Gonta!
What?
Because...
It's actually very debatable what his true feelings and intentions were
but I choose to believe he actually did feel bad for Gonta and was genuinely upset upon seeing his execution. But Kokichi is a liar up until the very end, so for him to tell one more lie here is nothing. And at the end of the day, who really cares what his true motivations or actual goals are? You probably hate him after this chapter. I know I did first time around. His character is meant to be hated. It's actually impressive how he's written in such an evil manner, but it's never to the point of becoming cringy or ridiculous. All in all, Chapter 4 is easily one of my favorite Danganronpa chapters I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing, and Kokichi easily made it one hell of a ride.
It's almost time. Yeah, it's almost time. This should be enough. I'll end it. Now is the time. I'll end this killing game.
Before I even started writing the script for this video, I knew there would be a couple difficult chapters to discuss, and I was positive the most difficult discussion would be Chapter 5. This chapter sees us starting to dip our toes into the last act of the game, with it almost feeling like a warm-up or prelude to the absolute madness we're going to encounter in Chapter 6. We open up this chapter with a ton of tension in the air. Kaito's still pretending to be healthy despite the clear decline in his health. Kokichi has suddenly disappeared since the end of the 4th trial, and the dynamic between Kaito and Shuichi is still out of whack since their disagreement in said trial. Monokuma does the usual. He opens up the next floor, which leads to the discovery of Kaito's space-themed research lab. Inside the lab, our cast finds a strange document detailing something called the Gopher Project. The disturbing document details a government plan to send students into space following the destruction of Earth, with the goal of finding them a new habitable planet. All of this supporting Alter Ego Gonta's statements from the last case. Later in the chapter, Kaito forms a plan to escape the game. He proposes that all the remaining students fight Monokuma using Maki's weapons, taking advantage of the fact that the Monokubs are dead, therefore leaving the Exisals unpiloted. The group decides to gather at the gym and plan to fight Monokuma, but are interrupted by Kokichi suddenly showing up. This time, Kokichi brings several tools with him, custom made by Miu. These include hammers and grenades with EMP elements to them, all capable of temporarily disabling electronic devices. Apparently, Miu made these tools under the command of Kokichi, all while being entirely opposed to fighting Monokuma herself. Kokichi exits the gym and leaves the electro hammers behind as his own little peace offering to the group. The group decides to give these hammers a shot and uses said hammers to traverse the death road to despair. This time around, thanks to the electro hammers, the students actually successfully make it to the end of the tunnel. Believing they've finally found their freedom, they open the door to the outside world, and well... That's a lot of despair. Kokichi reappears and decides to rub salt in the wound with his revelation to everyone that the Gopher Project is actually real. The reason they were all still on Earth is due to a cult that sought the end of humanity. Without getting too much into the details, Kokichi tops it all off by claiming he was the leader of the Doomsday Cult and that he is the mastermind of the killing game. Kaito tries to attack Kokichi in a blind rage, and Kokichi summons an Exisal to protect himself. Kokichi ends up kidnapping Kaito. After a couple days of the group wallowing in depression over the fact the outside world held nothing for them,
Maki brings good news that motivates them to actually form a plan to rescue Kaito. With a little bit of preparation, the group puts their plan to action. On the day of the rescue mission, we encounter a strange series of events that inevitably leads to what might be the most mysterious incident in the game.
I did say this chapter was a mixed bag, so let's start off with something that's always bothered me. Kokichi repeatedly claiming to be the mastermind. For me, this isn't really believable because of the game's own story. In short, the idea of Kokichi being the mastermind is pretty ludicrous because we already have seen a scene of Kokichi and Monokuma conspiring together. I don't think Kokichi, the alleged mastermind, needs to run things by Monokuma. On top of that, why would the game reveal the mastermind to us in such a fashion? Maybe those inside the game might be motivated to believe Kokichi's nonsense, but as someone in the audience who wants to be entertained, it's just kind of boring seeing this because you just know so well and in the back of your mind that the mastermind accusations make zero sense. Here's a common complaint, but something I somehow never picked up on my first playthrough: the Electro tools. I don't know anyone who can defend these. They just aren't thought out well. I don't know how they went about writing the story of this game, but I put the odds at frighteningly high Case 5 was not something they planned ahead for. These Electro tools serve as the biggest assholes in the game, and they just present more questions than answers. If I am to truly believe Kokichi threatened or forced Miu into making these tools, why are they only being presented in this chapter? Specifically, why is the remote that controls Exisouls only being introduced now? And considering Miu just died in chapter 4, she obviously would have had to have created these tools between chapters 2 and 3. It couldn't have been during chapter 4, as she spends the entire chapter preparing the Neo Road program, and every time you want to meet her for a free time event, she's in the computer lab. And it's impossible she made these during chapter 1, because even with Miu being a complete coward, Monokuma threatening to kill them all in less than 48 hours would have been enough reason to pull these tools out. Oh, and concerning the remote control I mentioned earlier, it's not just an Exisal remote control, it can control any electronic device. Are you starting to see why these tools are fucking absurd? They retroactively make Miu the most powerful individual in the game, even more than the mastermind or Monokuma. To continue this trend of bad planning, we have the equally contrived Exisal voice changer. If I'm wrong, please correct me, but I have never seen this voice changer functionality foreshadowed or mentioned, not even once. I'm not saying the voice changer is impossible. In fact, in the realm of this universe, it's actually very possible, but it's not even being used by the Monokubs, not even as a joke or a gag. I just find it hard to believe. Also, if we're being real for a second, if these things are designed to only be piloted by the Monokubs, what the fuck is the point of giving them a voice changer anyway? And for me, the cherry on top has to be when Kaito tells us that Kokichi gave him an entire script. This is so fucking stupid. Why doesn't the game just say Kokichi gave Kaito a small outline, but it was up to Kaito to freestyle most of it? That would have been a lot more realistic, and it also would have been a lot more consistent thematically with Kaito and Kokichi reaching a better understanding of each other in equal pursuit of ending the killing game. The voice changer in the Exisal just gives me the same vibes as the Electro tools. It's just so apparent these are ass pulls that were not well thought out. And I know someone will inevitably say, "Oh, Samugi actually planned for the students to be in the Exisal, she wrote the murder ahead of time." Why would she write a murder she and the team couldn't solve? Forgive me for delving into chapter 6 right now, but I just really wanted to dead that excuse while I still could. This sleeve hanging out the press is also way too on the nose for me. I need the writers to understand the type of person who plays this game. Not only is a V3 player more likely to be a fan of this genre of games, the mere fact they are on the third game in the series
also gives away the fact that they've probably played the two predecessors in this series. It's not helped either by the fact that Kiba finds Kokichi's clothes in the toilet. I actually find it really hard to understand why they even bothered to flush his clothes. Considering the press couldn't be activated anymore, you could have just smashed Kokichi and his clothes under the press and there'd be less proof. One little pet peeve I can't let go of. During the trial, you know the question where you're asked what Kaido was shot with and the game has both the arrows and the crossbow as truth bullet options? Whichever developer decided to do this, you are a dick. I think I've probably ragged in this chapter a little bit too hard, so let me actually get into the more positive aspects of it all. Firstly, I think this trial was rather clever with some of the evidence you needed to prove your case. The video is perhaps my favorite piece of evidence in this trial. The decision to add the pause in the video is really good. I remember during my initial playthrough I couldn't tell if I was overthinking things or if the pause was even relevant. And the surrounding dialogue that continuously reiterates that the edited footage was an impossibility only added to my confusion. Of course, I did start to scrutinize it as I put it into the context of the trial and as the case moved on, but it was a smart decision regardless and it kept me on my toes. You may have noticed during the story and chapter discussion, I usually separate the good from the bad when discussing the chapters, but I didn't know how to address this specific topic and I didn't know whether to put it in positive or negative, so I figured, let's just get the elephant in the room out of the way. The amount of hate Maki gets for her actions during this trial, I just don't agree with. Many people have this weird tendency to call a character bad simply because they do something reprehensible rather than because the character is actually bad. Maki is one of those people. To clarify, I am not a huge Maki fan, nor am I a huge Maki hater. I'm just really indifferent towards her. However, her behavior during this chapter was completely reasonable. I alluded to this earlier in the video, but Maki is an isolated and lonely person. She's not good at social situations, and she doesn't really have that many people she's close to. So imagine this. Now she gets thrown into a death game of random people, and for the first time in her life, she has people who genuinely think of her as a friend. And not just that, she has a love interest. Now this is just my guess, but Maki being a teenage assassin and all, she has probably never had a love interest before in her life. So Maki acting insane, trying to save Kaito on her own, and ending up causing this entire mess, I don't really blame her. She was absolutely being an irrational dickhead, but I do understand how she feels. Furthermore, her behavior mid-trial just also makes a lot of sense given the antisocial tendencies I ascribed to her earlier. You can call Maki a bitch all you want. You can even get mad at her for prioritizing killing Kokichi over everyone's lives. But for the emotionally volatile mess that she was, it made sense. The writers didn't suddenly make Maki a cunt for no reason. This is a big part of their attempt at giving the character growth, and it was clearly the most emotional she's ever been. This chapter is meant to be a learning opportunity for her. She needs to learn how to handle her emotions rather than lashing out and self-destructing. That's the key most are forgetting with Maki this chapter. It's easy to forget this considering the adult themes all over this game, but at the end of the day, Maki is an emotional, lovesick, isolated, and hormone-crazed teenager. Hating Maki for acting badly isn't the same as hating Maki because you think she's uninteresting or stale. All that said, I am not a fan of Maki, nor her writing. There's actually quite a bit you can criticize with her in this chapter. One of the most reasonable complaints you can levy at her is the fact that she doesn't really learn anything. After all her trial antics, the complete non-reaction by those within the group is just perplexing. She isn't rebuked for her actions, nor does she even apologize. A simple apology on Maki's part would have gone so far from Maki's writing here, I swear to God. While I do agree that Shuichi and Himiko are both guilty of derailing trials for people they love and are naturally going to be more accommodating and understanding to Maki's situation by default, to pretend like what they did equates to Maki's actions is an insane level of ignorance. Shuichi refusing to talk and Himiko openly giving up cannot be equated with Maki actively pursuing the wrong answer in a trial. All of these people were being selfish, but I'm not willing to pretend like Maki wasn't going to do something worse. It's funny, I wanted to keep this part of the Chapter 5 analysis as positive as I could,
but I guess that's what happens when you try to tackle the most controversial character in the game. Personally, I think this chapter is Maki at her best, which says a lot about Maki's character. Take those words however you will. Also, Monokuma, absolutely a highlight of this case. I mean, if I'm being honest, Monokuma is always a highlight in these games. This dude is fucking perfect, an S-tier character. He's hilarious, not to mention his callousness towards the students in the deaf game is genuinely entertaining. He's particularly comedic during Chapter 5, easily proving during this chapter that he doesn't need the Monokubs, despite what the developers might have thought. Yes, they added the Monokubs late into development because of reasoning along these lines. Throughout the trial, Monokuma is visibly nervous, sweating bullets because he doesn't even know the right answer to who committed the crime. Multiple times, a robotic teddy bear just outright delays the vote, and most hilariously, in a bit of desperation never seen in Danganronpa, he just outright joins your party. Monokuma's pretty fucking rad in this trial, and I'm happy to see that he has never changed as one of the best characters in the entire series. I also overlooked this during my little summary of the chapter earlier, but this chapter really sets the mood better than any other. After the discovery of the destroyed planet, Kaito's kidnapping, and Kokichi's speech, you can see the absolute despair that plagues the school and our cast. Shuichi finds himself laying in bed doing nothing. It's so depressing and genuinely difficult to watch. More so than ever, it feels like the events of the game are truly weighing down on our cast, and to watch them eventually rise above this despair and collectively determined to save Kaito, that is beyond satisfying. And everything I just mentioned here supports my earlier claim that this chapter feels like a sort of prelude to the final act. Seriously, this chapter is a roller coaster of hope and despair. It's full of insane conspiracies and mysteries we don't have the answers to. Our characters are forced into these big arguments and moral clashes that we've never seen before. Monokuma doesn't even know who died? K-Stick is going to take everything here and just turn it up by 11. Hence why I consistently call this the warm-up for that case. Seriously, if there's one thing this case absolutely nails, it's this aspect of things. Chapter 5 is an okay, maybe good chapter. Its biggest issue by far is its plot devices and ass pulls that consistently plague it. I understand with a series like Danganronpa it can be legitimately hard to make something narratively consistent but also consistently entertaining, but I do think we get the bad end of this trade at multiple points in Chapter 5. Seriously, it feels like a lot of this chapter was just phoned in and they were just really desperate to make something comparable to Trial of 5 from Danganronpa 2. I know the cases aren't similar, but they have the same heart, so to say. Outside of that, the investigation is far from boring, the trial is an emotional circus, and the case serves as the perfect beginning for the end of the game. I don't knock this chapter too much, but I do always find myself wishing for just a little bit more. After giving this game another chance and another playthrough, what am I to even think? Chapter 6 and the ending of Danganronpa V3 put into serious question whether series creator Kazutaka Kodaka is God's gift to visual novels and a writing genius, or a completely overrated hack that struck gold in 2010 and has simply milked the franchise as hard as he could. Chapter 6, Goodbye Danganronpa. Here we have what might easily be the most controversial and divisive chapter in the entirety of the Danganronpa franchise, and for good reason. By its very design and the admission of the creator, this chapter was purposely designed to evoke emotions out of the audience, and in interviews, Kazutaka Kodaka has made it clear he wants Danganronpa to be a place where being angry is allowed.
I'm not planning to fill this fandom with only enthusiastic fans. I think it's okay to have some people who come to this place just to get angry. Rather, I want this series to be the place where getting angry is acceptable. I want it to grow in that way.
It's clear Kodaka isn't just interested in blind praise and positivity. The man wants a range of emotions, including anger concerning his work. Does he succeed at this? Absolutely. That much is not up for debate. V3 is a game to feel emotional about, and I would know because I used to be very emotional about this, so I won't deny that he has definitely succeeded on that front. But my goal here is more so to ask a question, and a question that only the viewer can answer. The viewer who has seen this whole video so far and is expecting me to do a slam dunk on the ever so hated chapter 6, expecting me to eviscerate and shit all over this chapter. I guess in essence, my question to that viewer is, do you hate this chapter because it's actually a bad chapter? Or do you hate this chapter because it makes you feel bad? Or is it both? I'll give you my answer to this, so just hold that question in your brain for a bit. The chapter opens up with Kiba going on an absolute rampage, actively going out of his way to destroy the Ultimate Academy. The remaining students, Tsumugi, Himiko, Maki, and Shuichi, manage to convince Kiba to talk to them and explain himself. He surmises that destroying the academy is the only way to defeat despair, and sees the death of his classmates has an unfortunate consequence. Shuichi talks Kiba down for a bit, convincing Kiba to let him and the others do a little bit of investigation. Kiba then decides to give the group until dawn to somehow prove the game is being televised and that Monokuma still has to adhere to the rules. This investigation sees the opening of several new labs and delivers us multiple new narrative-defining revelations. Kokichi's research lab exposes that he's nothing more than a mere prankster, far from the actual leader of an evil organization. Rantaro's lab reveals that he was actually a survivor of the previous killing game, and that he earned a survivor perk of some sort. Upon investigating Kaito's lab, there's a room that hints at the Gopher Project and that they were all put to sleep in pods. The group later gathers at the library with the intent on searching through the infamous hidden room. Before they get Kiba to blow up the door, however, Maki suddenly reveals a vacuum she found that was created by Mew that was made to suck up bugs, with no bugs being found in said vacuum. The cast, unaware of its relevance at this moment in time, decides to push forward into the hidden room. Inside the room, several clues are found. Amongst these clues include Mother Kuma, a sort of strange bot that gives birth to more Monokumas, Rantaro's survivor perk, just sitting on the table, and a shot put ball inside the trash can. Upon the group leaving the hidden room, Himiko gets stuck inside as Kiba's fight with an Exisal ends up causing some destruction and blocks the entrance to the hidden room. Shuichi, low on time and choosing to believe in the competence of Himiko, decides to believe she'll be okay. Shuichi immediately continues his investigation and discovers a classroom that can produce flashback lights with a multitude of different contradicting events and memories, causing Shuichi to question the validity of the flashback lights he's been receiving this entire game. Himiko shows up, having actually escaped the library's hidden room. She reveals to Shuichi that she escaped through what appears to be a secret passage to the hidden room, with the entrance being in the girls' bathroom. With all this information at hand, the group decides to present Kiba with their findings. Kiba agrees to put his assaults on hold, Monokuma agrees with Shuichi's proposal for a final class trial, and the climax of the game fastly approaches, with any number of possibilities awaiting the heroes of this story. To start off, the investigation segment in this chapter is actually one of the best ones in the series. To be fair, this investigation segment has an unfair advantage considering the circumstances and that it's the final chapter, but that doesn't really change that it's better than most. Every other investigation in V3 is clearly guided by Monokuma and his cubs, to varying degrees. He's clearly playing like a fiddle and leading you to clues. This chapter is different though. There's no murder or necessity for a trial. You and the students are in control of the investigation and are looking for the truth on your own terms. You aren't being guided by flashback lights, keys to unlock doors, or clues of any kind. Kiba is blowing up the school for you, and you're going through rummaging for clues. This is an exciting investigation. You have to go through the school full of rubble and Exisals walk in the hallways. This is a contrast to the prologue, where you ran from an Exisal and were guided to the gym full of students. Instead, now you and a couple other students frantically search through the school of your own volition, blowing up anything you don't get access to and fending off the Exisals that once filled you with fear. However, I will say, the worst part of this investigation has to be the timer at the top of the screen. The timer for this chapter is entirely aesthetic and useless, and I have no idea why they decided it absolutely needed to be added.
Thematically, it's kind of cool because it makes the player feel a sort of intense pressure to finish the investigation quickly. There's no time to casually investigate things because shit is getting intense. But the issue with the timer is, it's no longer something worth taking seriously once you've died to it once. By then, you realize the timer is ironically a waste of time. You just get sent back to one of the very generously placed checkpoints and have to redo a little bit of dialogue. And in retrospect, while I do appreciate the attempt to make things more tense by having this dumbass timer, the fact that you can find monocubs during this chapter just really undercuts that. I've never been against this game encouraging some exploration. I'm honestly okay with it, but filling this purposely rushed investigation with hidden monocubs seems like a little bit of a clash of ideas here, especially when the death message you get during this chapter explicitly tells you to only investigate what is necessary and to hurry the fuck up. Also, have any of you actually managed to finish the investigation before the timer ran out? Did you manage to do it in your first playthrough? If so, kudos to you because that is fucking impressive. I also believe it's time to beat a dead horse once again. So, Kokichi asked Miu specifically to make a vacuum designed for sucking up bugs, because our local dumbass Gonta kept saying he was seeing bugs. Bugs that no one else was seeing. I'm so glad Super Genius Kokichi specifically asked Miu to make this, alongside all the absurd electro tools from Chapter 5, because he somehow knew this would all be useful. And somehow, Miu managed to make all these tools over the course of what is essentially 2 to 3 chapters at best. And more amazingly, even with those Nanokumas apparently watching everything, everyone on Team Danganronpa either literally didn't notice what was happening here, or they somehow thought it was unnecessary to do anything about Miu, whose only barrier to ending the game at this point was her own cowardice. To me, this sounds very poorly thought out and a bit of lazy writing, just making things up as long as we go. How could someone watching everything not have noticed the fucking bug vacuum that was sucking up cameras, or have noticed the tools in that laboratory that were going to be used against them? It's pretty sad too, because they did hint at the nanocubs with Gonta talking about bugs consistently. This was clearly a very well thought out and planned plotline. What doesn't seem to have been thought out very well is how we were going to discover these cameras. So instead, the game sadly falls back to its tired old trick of relying on Miu's ultimate talent as a shortcut to push things forward. It's sad they're still milking her at this stage of the game. I feel like if you had a single scene with the bug vac being used in a previous chapter, it wouldn't feel so dumb right now. Albeit, this is way less atrocious than anything we saw in Chapter 5 with the electro tools, but I still wanted to call it out. Don't be fooled by my negativity though, this chapter has some good to it. The Ultimate Survivor revelation is hands down one of my favorite moments in the entire game, and it's probably the best talent reveal in the entire series. I think they teased this aspect of the story very well, and it's so fucking crazy to finally have it all exposed to you in Rantaro's lab. I can be pretty mixed on the teasers they place in between the beginning and end of chapters. A lot of them are just red herring bullshit, or in the case of Kokichi and Monokuma's discussion, sort of detrimental to the story later on, but the decision to place part of Rantaro's video message as a teaser was simply brilliant. It makes the payoff this late in the game all that much more worth it. It's one of the few moments in the game that even on second playthrough just makes me absolutely do a Reddit soy face. It's just so fucking cool.
I get that this is probably pretty confusing seeing yourself like this. Guess I should start from the beginning. First things first, I am you. No tricks, no actors. It's you. A reason you don't remember recording this is because that memory was erased. Think of this video as a message from the Rantaro before you lost your memory to the Rantaro after you lost your memory.
Seriously, this moment solidified Rantaro as one of my favorite characters in this game. Despite his short screen time, his character is given lots of love and attention. He's not simply just the first guy who gets killed off. He's not Leon. He's a guy who actually matters in the grand scheme of the story, and I love that even in Chapter 6, he's still sort of relevant. He's distinct enough and has enough questions surrounding him that you spend the whole game wondering what he really knew. Why was he asking about what the ultimate hunt was? What was his talent? And now in this very moment, you get that payoff. And man, does it feel good. The idea of doing a retrial for Chapter 1 is very welcome. Seriously, retrialing that case was beyond necessary, because let me tell you, I was very unimpressed with it my first time around playing this game, and even now I still feel satisfied but low-key bitter about Chapter 1. This chapter takes Danganronpa 1's sex trial and amps it up to a much greater extreme. I actually don't have a lot of commentary on this specifically, but I did want to express my approval with this idea. The actual retrial of Rantaro's death bothers me for one specific reason, and it's the Mastermind's room. I wonder why Rantaro's monopad is just out on the table, or why the shot put is simply just thrown in the trash. I'm gonna be honest, I really doubt this is the only way to get rid of these items. I'm also especially floored by the Survivor perk monopad just being left functional and not immediately erased or destroyed. I might be nitpicking. If I am, fine, but something about the ease of obtaining this evidence is just a little bit insane to me. I know the Mastermind expected no one to be able to get into their room, but this is an insanely and bafflingly bad level of due diligence for the orchestrator of a killing game. And since we're on the topic of the Mastermind, if there's one topic that did genuinely make me hate this chapter my first playthrough, and still pisses me off now, it's Tsumugi. I obviously haven't found a place in the video to declare my feelings on this subject yet, so I might as well say it now. I'm not a big fan of Junko Enoshima. She was an okay villain in Danganronpa 1, and despite Danganronpa 2 being my favorite in the series, I really did not need another appearance from her. So I never thought they could somehow give us a Mastermind way worse than Junko, but they somehow did. It is Tsumugi Shirogane. On the face of it, Tsumugi being the Mastermind should have been a slam dunk and something pretty painless to implement into the story. There's a lot of potential here. This is the first time the Mastermind was actually by her side the entire time and participating in the game. All the themes of betrayal that permeate this game, they could have truly hit a home run with Tsumugi here. Someone we spent the whole game with, someone we somehow survived until the very end with. They were a traitor and murderer this whole time? But that doesn't work for Tsumugi because the writers were very insistent on keeping her as an observer of the story rather than a participant. Unless you did some free time events with her, and why would you? You just don't talk to this chick. She's not someone you can pull off this feeling of betrayal with. She never felt like she was truly by your side. It also doesn't help that she's the most obvious Mastermind candidate of all time, but that's a side note. At the same time though, I can understand why the writers are so committed to keeping her this way. Her character is laid out to bear before us all. She's not trying to insert herself into the gamer's story. It's not about Tsumugi. Tsumugi is literally the ultimate cosplayer. Her entire existence is about emphasizing others. I will admit and I will concede, this level of commitment to a character is admirable. This doesn't make up for the fact that 90% of the game's runtime she is a boring and uninteresting piece of shit who contributes almost nothing to most cases, but it does show there's a vision for her and they refuse to compromise on it, for better or for worse. I really do hate Tsumugi, but I can't knock the hustle. And perhaps the most controversial aspect of this trial, I will now have to discuss Tsumugi's infamous exposition dump. Specifically, her revealing that Danganronpa is fictional, that all their personalities were made up, and that the entire world sees the killing game as entertainment.
You're just normal, average, everyday people with no ultimate talent whatsoever. When you guys came to this academy for the first time, you were just boring, everyday high school students.
You were average students with no talent, just like me.
But boring everyday characters have no right to be in Danganronpa. So you were all made more suitable for your new roles.
When I originally saw this part, I was convinced this game was a waste of my fucking time. 1.5 years later though, with much more emotional distance from the game, I think I was overreacting my first playthrough. In retrospect, I actually sort of respect this decision now. It's pretty ballsy to try and pull this shit on a fanbase this rabid, one who loves your games this much. I know there was an intent to stir controversy here, but even then, this is borderline insane. I, as a fan, was fucking pissed off and legitimately hated Danganronpa after Tsumugi started talking and saying all this bullshit. Why wouldn't I be pissed? It felt like the developers were just spitting in my face. I'll never forget streaming that original playthrough and having my entire chat agree with me on how much they hated the ending of the game. We all bonded over how much we despised the game. Even upon the second playthrough, I was so convinced that I would come back to this part of the game and remember why I hated Danganronpa V3 so much. In my mind, there was no way my original emotional conviction concerning this case could be ill-begotten. But now, without an overload of emotions and shock overwhelming me, or a chat full of people influencing me, I can confidently say, in retrospect, I was wrong about why I hated this ending. This is a story decision I actually respect, but with a massive asterisk. You see, on paper, I actually accept this ending, but in reality, I have massive reservations. And that's because of the epilogue and the writer's insistence on planting intentional inconsistencies within the story. While I do think it's cheap and honestly sort of corny to sort of force the characters to survive, I can get behind it anyway. I'm okay with the happy ending, even if we do a little bit of cheating for it. My problem with this epilogue is how indecisive and wishy-washy it is. I absolutely hate how the writers of this game used the epilogue to try and save face for what they just did to not only Danganronpa V3, but the entire series. The choice to question Tsumugi's honesty and indirectly imply that everything about Hope's Peak and the first two games might actually be real, now that is some cowardly shit. Purposely making the ending as open-ended as possible, trying to give themselves an out? It's not just this epilogue, it's shit such as Cospox, the strange prologue, the audition tapes. Sorry, but this fucking sucks. These intentional inconsistencies can be used to both prove or disprove Tsumugi's revelations. They are purposely placed in the story so you can interpret this shit however you want and headcanon whatever bullshit fan theory you want. Reality is, there was always going to be a debate on Tsumugi's truthfulness and what was false. Trying to get ahead and start that conversation in this specific manner just strikes me as some pussy shit. It reads as damage control and an unwillingness to commit to one of the ballsiest writing decisions in the entire series, and it stinks up and ruins what should be the best ending in the series. It's a pity I have to sit here and rant about that, because now, after playing the game again, I've come to realize there's a lot to like about this ending. Specifically, how the cast responds to it all. Every Danganronpa cast in the past was simply trying to end the killing game they found themselves in. For this crew, however, it wasn't simply about ending their own game, they wanted to end the concept of the killing game itself. And I absolutely loved their response to the situation at hand. Shuichi valiantly declares that it doesn't matter if it's all fake, everything he felt, everything that happened to him in the killing game was real. Whether or not his backstory is fictional, or whether or not he was set to go down a certain path, that doesn't matter. His feelings for Kaede felt real, his grief felt real, the suffering for his classmates felt real. Shuichi really comes into his own during this trial, and we had so many moments that sent a chill down my spine, with him cutting into the bullshit of the mastermind of Monokuma. And I know I'm all over the place, but Shuichi has one of the best rebuttal showdowns in Danganronpa during this trial. His rant about how Hope is the villain, it's brilliant. You, as the player, are giving into exactly what Tsumugi wants. You have this hope that our cast will shut her down. You have this hope that in the end, Shuichi will win it all. You are the audience in-game that so desperately craves for hope. And the best part of it all is when the cast collectively decides to just not take part in the killing game anymore. Hope be damned, despair be damned, fuck all of it. Fuck this entertainment, and fuck the audience. Ignore the minigames, ignore the vote,
and forsake the redundant binary of hope versus despair. After 53 killing games, it's time for a final stand. It's time to end the concept of the killing game itself, and permanently. Shuichi and his friends will no longer give the audience anything, positive or negative, hope or despair. They see an audience that begs for entertainment and gives them the worst possible results: nothing.
Danganronpa will never end, will it?
Together, we're gonna end Danganronpa!
In the opening of this chapter, we see a little kid named Makoto. His life is miserable, he feels the weight of academic pressure, he's isolated from his classmates, and has minimal parental support. Despite that, he has one thing that makes all the suffering okay: his favorite show, Danganronpa. Instead of being inspired to fix himself or his life through Danganronpa, he uses it as a sort of escape and continues to stagnate in his own personal life. Danganronpa V3 aggressively questions this ever so prevalent narrative that fiction is nothing but an escape. It seems like V3 is actually telling that fiction should be used as a guide for helping to improve your own life, rather than as an excuse to stagnate or escape from reality. With some reflection, I've come to believe this ending doesn't completely deserve the hate it gets. I understand the hate, and so does Kodaka, but after giving everything some careful consideration again, it's just far from the worst thing ever, and I don't think it ruins Danganronpa. At the beginning of this chapter discussion, I distinctly asked, do you hate this chapter because it's a bad chapter, or because it makes you feel bad? It's far from perfect, and I've listed out my numerous grievances, namely the unwillingness to commit. But even now, with all the credit I do give this ending, and all the hate I also give this ending, I'm unsure how I feel about it. I may end up going back on my opinion right after I hit upload. In fact, during the writing and recording of this video, I changed my mind on this ending multiple times. But honestly, that's part of what I like about this ending in Chapter 6. I know this is an enlightened centrist view and not nearly as satisfying as blind rage or blind praise, but it is an honest evaluation on my part. Aside from the epilogue, this chapter was a daring, very deliberate, and resolute ending to the game, with an uncompromising commitment to evoke emotion out of the audience. And for better or for worse, that's what makes Chapter 6 so special.
We stand with one foot in fiction and one foot in reality.
Then, we need to see for ourselves whether this fictional world has changed the outside world, and what we can do from this point on.
You're right. We can't stay in this fictional world forever. It's already over. We gotta take all the experience we earned in this world and go on to the next.
Yeah, let's go. We'll see what this world gained and what it lost, and all the rest. Let's find out together.
Hey guys, welcome to the intermission. This is the most unnecessary, unneeded part of the video, so feel free to skip ahead if you want, but I figured, why not use this short little time frame to discuss something unimportant? I really wanted to get into a certain topic.
Rise and shine, Ursine!
Ah yes, the Monokubs. I decided for this video's intermission we'd have a little bit of fun. I went the whole story section without really mentioning these little fuckers, but let's have a quick and useless discussion. As a man who passionately hated these fuckers in my first playthrough, I have to say, my tune them is actually flipped.
Not only do I now think the Monokubs are actually funny, I think they fit with the themes of the story perfectly. Seriously, it's one thing for Monokuma to sit around and make light of every situation you're in, but to have 5 mini Monokumas just run around and even be more annoying than him is just perfect. So, during the research for this video, I watched a really dope Archipel interview with Kazutaka Kodaka. This interview is really enlightening because it sort of explains so much of Kodaka's approach to how he writes Danganronpa and how the series has the charm that it does.
デスゲーム、はっきり言ってしまえば命をかけるゲームなので、人を殺すのに動機とか全くいらない。なので、殺人という行為がすごく軽いところが僕は正直惹かれるところですね。やっぱ殺人の行為とかこの動機が重いとどうしてもこうリアルというかものになるとどうしても罪悪感というのは感じてしまうんで、そこはこうゲームはゲーム、現実は現実でこうパッキリ分けて考えられる人がやるべきプレイするべきものだとは思いますけど。だからそこの命の軽さ、命のやり取りっていうのがすごい好きですね。究極のブラックジョークみたいな感じなのかな。もちろん現実世界で人なんて殺せないし、人殺しなんて相当重いことじゃないですか。ゲームでそれを軽々しくやってしまうみたいな、そういうブラックジョークみたいなところがなんか個人的には好きですね。
When you consider this perspective on the Killing Games and how he views it all as some darker joke, it really makes sense of everything in Danganronpa. The Monokubs, for me, are just an extension of this. He adds in something so obviously goofy and out of place, and it just adds up to a joke. And for a group added late in development, they do play a legit role in the story. At multiple points, we see them just accidentally give away major secrets during class trials. They also take over the academy at one point while Monokuma does an impromptu vacation. They pilot the exos to keep the students in line. They hand out motives and keys. And honestly, I think that's what's most shocking about the Monokubs. I'm surprised they play so much of a major role in the story. It's really funny just having 5 incompetent Monokumas run around and like ruin everything they can. If there's one thing they accomplish and that they do really well, they constantly remind you that you're playing Danganronpa. Yeah, your friend may have been stabbed 62 times, but one of the teddy bears is fucking his sister on the TV, so who cares? Maybe they showed up a little bit too much, but I'm not really mad at their inclusion. I will, however, say, I am going on a fucking rampage if I hear the phrase "Rise and Shine Earthsign" one more fucking time. Perhaps one of my biggest gripes with the previous iterations of Danganronpa was how it looked. Specifically the first game. Danganronpa 1's character design struck me as okay, and sometimes as really good. I wasn't really a fan of its environments or backgrounds though, and if I'm being honest, Trigger Happy Havoc's UI makes me barf. This, however, is not the case with V3. Killing Harmony is the best looking Danganronpa to date. It blows the other games in the series out of the water, and it ain't even close. Danganronpa V3 is a game that was made for the PS4, has a much better budget than its predecessors, and it's way more ambitious. I'll only be discussing a couple aspects of this game's looks because if I really did sit down here and look at every nook and cranny, we'd be here forever. But we do need to genuinely sit down and appreciate this game a bit. Where do I even begin? Let's start off with character designer Rui Komatsuzaki. Komatsuzaki has been involved in the Danganronpa series since the start. Before Kodaka even threw the Danganronpa concept at Spike Chunsoft, the most Komatsuzaki ever contributed to the gaming industry were minor roles to some of the Dragon Ball Z games in the mid to late 2000s. And he only did character design for one of those games. So when you see the designs in Danganronpa 1 and compare them to the stuff we have in this game, it can't surprise you how much his designs have gotten better in V3. A lot of the character designs in the OG Danganronpa strike me as safe, never really going too far.
V3, however, has some of the most eccentric character design in the entire series. Kokichi alone is enough proof for my claim. Gaze upon his iconic purple hair and his just overall color scheme. He also has this professional all-white clothing that you might see an evil CEO wear, but it's also tattered and rough around the edges, matching the trickster vibes he gives off. And then there's that dumbass little handkerchief or bandana, I don't know what to call it. It's like icing on the cake. He really is the supreme leader, but he's also sort of a joke. He looks serious and threatening enough when needed, but on the flip of a dime, can also throw out juvenile and crude insults toward his peers. With Kokichi's crazy character design alongside his volatile personality, this is how you get a moment like this in the series.
I am the supreme leader of evil, so it's obvious my personality would be twisted. The more you suffer, the more I enjoy it. There are people in this world who spread grief and misery for no reason than the thrill of it. And I'm one of those people. Nothing pleases me more than inflicting pain on others!
That speech is written well and all, but I'm telling you right now, the artwork is what really sells it. The fact that you can have a clip like this juxtaposed to a clip like this and it be the same person, this proves that Kokichi is versatile and his design plays a huge role in letting him get this off. Anju Inaga is our game's ultimate artist. One thing I love most about her is that she serves as a massive parody for the worst aspects of religion and spirituality. Anju's a free spirit, an authoritarian, and a servant of God all at the same time. Her design is interesting because it perfectly suits her ultimate talent, but does not match up with her behavior in the slightest. She's constantly wearing what appears to be a swimsuit underneath this yellow jacket. She has a little seashell necklace and a matching bracelet. There's little belts around her waist that contains paintbrushes, harkening back to that talent of hers. In fact, the inside of her jacket also leaves room for these paintbrushes. She has rose-colored cheeks that give away a deceptive air of innocence to her. But this is what makes Anju's design so great. All of what I described is the exact opposite of how she actually behaves. On paper, she looks like a little island hippie who stands by a live and let live philosophy of life. But no, instead Anju's a crazy religious dogmatist and authoritarian, and even goes as far as to purposely use her religion to exert control over others. This is so far from a live and let live or peaceful person. Everything about her is a strict adherence to her religion or having control over others. The scenes we get of Anju hugging Gonta, Tsumugi, and Himiko are fantastic because they catch every aspect of her personality. Anju's peaceful and soft appearance is completely juxtaposed by her low-key, manipulative language that she uses on each person she talks to. I think this is the perfect contrast. The way she talks is so far from what she looks like that you would have to think this was done on purpose. She looks like a sweet, caring grandmother, but is low-key just attempting to convert people into her religion. One thing I was dying to talk about in the character design section was the fucking sprites paired alongside these characters. Danganronpa V3 is what happens when you take daring, outgoing designs that perfectly match a character's personality, and then you add in some very expressive sprites that show a wide range of emotion. I really want to go back to a character like Kokichi for this discussion, because Kokichi has some of the best sprites in the game, but I think it's only fair I give this spotlight to another person. So let's talk about Miu Iruma. Anyone who has played this game, you know Miu. She's not exactly a forgettable character. Miu is a genius girl inventor, she's arrogant, she's a loudmouth who talks about sex constantly, and is also a massive coward. Her character design does a lot of the heavy lifting with staying true to this description of her. What really impresses me is her sprites. It's actually relatively impressive how many of Miu's sprites can be considered lewd. About half of them match that overly sexual nature of hers, but what's really amazing is that many of them serve double functions. It's impressive because there are clearly sprites that could be interpreted as not lewd, but by the mere fact that it's Miu, they have a double meaning where they can be interpreted that way. I also really love how many of these show off the more arrogant side of Miu's personality.
My favorite has to be this one. Look at the spit flying out of her mouth while she has her head held high in the air. This is peak Mew arrogance and I'm all for it. I love these poses where she just points directly at you, or the one where she actually bends down a little bit as she's pointing at you. She exudes confidence in her body language, which makes it all more entertaining when she completely flips the script and turns into an insecure coward. Gotta love the specific one here where her hair frizzles up, she defensively throws her arms back and starts sweating profusely. I think in terms of sprites, Kaito also serves as a great example. He's one of the most passionate characters in the game, and after the death of Kaede, the group desperately needs a clear emotional leader, and Kaito Momota easily fulfills this role. It's not enough for him to simply talk a big game though. His emotions need to somehow be perfectly displayed through these static 2D images. And the game does this well. Examine his excited demeanor when he holds his fist up. He looks mighty confident. His shonen protagonist levels of optimism just shine through. But now, examine that same sprite with a little bit of sweat and a slightly nervous expression added to his face. You can see he is still trying to feign ignorance and that false sense of confidence he's known for, but now there's a sign of instability there. Now, let's add even more sweat to his face and make his expression even more urgent by giving him an agape mouth. His confidence is still sort of there, except now he can't hide his obvious concern with whatever he's being presented with. Let's go back to that original sprite of him holding the fist up. But this time, we need to make it more angry. His hair and coat spiking up, no visible sweat on his face. This version of Kaito has all the confidence of the other versions, but now said confidence has been morphed into his own brand of hot-headedness. One of my favorite things about these sprites is the sense of progression and variability they all have. Mew actually had a similar situation going on, but I decided to use Kaito to spotlight this. In fact, every character in the game has a similar situation to this, as you can see with the sprites I'm showing on screen right now. The game is truly fantastic on this front. You'll see this concept pop up in almost every set of character sprites you see in this game. I'm already making a 3-hour YouTube video as is, so it's probably in the best interest of you as the viewer and me as the creator that I just moved on to the next subject anyway, but I hope you got the message of what I was trying to point across here. And last but most certainly not least, perhaps my favorite part of this game's visuals, we need to talk about the UI and menus. Holy fuck. After playing the main Danganronpa games, I can't believe how far this specific aspect of the game has come. Lead UI designer Ayumi Sugita, alongside Ayaka Nakao and Kayako Shibasaki, have done an outstanding job of making this game's user interface look the way it does. The V3 UI is fucking amazing. It has an artistic flair that seemed really lacking in the old UIs, all while still avoiding overwhelming the player. In previous Danganronpas, it almost felt as if designers were just playing it safe, but in this game, you can see their hard work really paying off. Before we get into this discussion, I should make it perfectly clear that the original games in the series were PSP games, so by their very nature they weren't going to look as good, but I'm going to compare them anyway because showing progression is a positive thing. Let me do something the viewers of my channel are probably really tired of me doing. Let's stare at some title screens. Look at the bland and boring title screen of the original Danganronpa. Now do me a favor and look at this shit we have in Killing Harmony. The minute I booted up this game, I was impressed. Ayumi Sugita took credit for this title screen, and credit to her. You open up the game and you get what looks like a school building on the right side of the screen, contrasted by a green sky and looping title screen text in the background. And then the options for loading and creating new games have this sort of road sign aesthetic. And what looks like completely dead and useless space on the left side of the screen is utilized by being filled up with options for how you want to load into the game. Not to mention, when you have your cursor over any option, the game continues to utilize its space properly by doing shit like putting a description across the window of the building. It's such an intelligent and effective way to go about doing things.
conveying similar levels of information to the player, but also making it look damn good. The user interface you will encounter the majority of your playthrough will be during the free time investigation segments, involving dialogue and text. Previous Danganronpas didn't do too much on this front. The original Danganronpa was outright inoffensive, while Danganronpa 2 was a big improvement, but it didn't really have anything to write home about. But V3 knocks it out the fucking park. First off, I want you to look at the actual text box the dialogue is located in. The text is completely unobstructed while it's having a unique visual flair. The paint spiders on the sides, the shapes that make the outside of the box, it's nice little touches like this that really make it fun to look at. It gives off personality. Another sweet little detail about this UI that jumped out at me is how it purposely colors one letter of the name of whoever is talking. This color always matches whatever color is most dominant in that character's design, so a light pink for Kaede or a red eye for Maki. It's such a random but subtle stylistic choice that adds a little bit of extra character. Oh, and another aspect of this user interface that makes me come, it's the visuals when you talk to someone in the game. In the Danganronpa V3 art book, we get several interviews from various people, the design team included. During one of these interviews, lead background designer Satoshi Kawahara mentions the UI, with Sugita and Nakao both responding in a waggish manner, making a joke of the process they endured to get to this point.
Never, especially for the non-child part. I can't even count how many times we changed it.
It took the longest for us to figure out how to fit 3 characters on the same dialogue.
Let me be the first person to proudly declare, none of these efforts were wasted. This UI sets out to make you feel as a more active participant in the conversation, and it absolutely succeeds. For example, when someone talks, the camera zooms in on their face and obfuscates the background with a tile-like design so there's more focus on that character. In a stroke of brilliance, the game avoids making the player feel left out by occasionally shoving your portrait next to a talking character, all with the purpose of making you feel active in the conversation. It's a really visually pleasing addition and makes you feel important to said conversation rather than just some headless first-person entity. In terms of the player pause menu, I appreciate the fact that this game tries to keep consistency with its in-game lore by presenting it in the form of a touchscreen tablet, sort of like a monopad. It has little Monokuma app icons, alongside letting you customize it with different themes and backgrounds and colors. I don't want to outright call this menu brilliant, but it does look very clean, it's extremely easy to navigate, and it does a good job of being consistent with in-game lore. And there are plenty of other small things in this game that I really want to comment on. For example, the student introductions in this game, they're beautiful. Just another example of this game blowing its 2 predecessors out of the water. Look at this shit.
Not that you'll remember my name anyway, but I'm Toko Fukawa.
Let's see. I'm Mahiru Koizumi. I'll be counting on you from now on.
Maki Harukawa, Ultimate Child Caregiver.
I see.
The spinning gun chamber in the background, the colors that contrast near perfectly with the character on screen, the shadow to accentuate the character even further. You're only gonna see the screen a couple of times, but it's pretty satisfying. And this isn't even to mention everything about this game's UI is dynamic as fuck. The UI actually depends on who you're playing as and what situation you're in, but even then, it looks good regardless. You can legitimately palette swap it and still have it look great because the base design is just that good. That's why this shit can go from green in the prologue to gold in the day to blue in the evening and give you zero visual whiplash. Not to mention the numerous available pause designs, or just looking in the actual court scenarios, as we see in the 6th case, it can effortlessly swap between people and still look good.
The save menu is actually the most visually boring part of this UI because it's just a simple Danganronpa V3 logo. They could have easily made it a bit more visually interesting, something like what I've seen out of Kingdom Hearts where it just changes randomly. However, this is just so unimportant and stupid to point out, and the fact that this is my biggest criticism so far, it goes to show you this UI has done a lot correctly. I'm basically grasping for straws for a criticism at this point. And of course, the most obvious thing that I've only tangentially mentioned, the UI of the trial segments. I know I've said this multiple times during this segment of the video, and it's definitely getting old, but I mean this now more so than at any other point. This is the best the series has ever looked. The UI in these class trials is prepossessing, entrancing, it's glorious. The neon light aesthetic, the mugshot on the side of the screen, it's all so fucking exquisite. Trials have come a long way from their 2010 Trigger Happy Havoc days. I hate this section of the video because there's just so much going on visually that I don't even know where to begin or what to cover. Okay, the non-stop debates. We can try starting here. Non-stop debates are looking great in this game. There's a distinct blue hue on the background. This is a great decision because not only does it complement the color scheme of the UI's dark and blue theme, it allows you to slightly de-emphasize the camera panning and all the characters' expressions and put more emphasis on the floating text. Speaking of said text, these trials and their debates feature 20 fonts. I cannot express to you how insane this is when the previous game only used one. In fact, they were only planning to put 3 fonts in the game, and the UI designers had to fight to get 20 in. I'm also surprisingly impressed by the bottom left of the screen. The truth bullets and chamber are in their best looking form yet. There's just so much visually going on in the bottom left, this is way too much for a truth bullet, but it looks so fucking good. One minor detail that always gets me, whenever the person giving the testimony changes, the name in the top left does a little flash where it goes through all the names and colors. It really doesn't need to do this, but it does, and it's better for it. I just really admire this weird attention to detail. There's also these really neat visuals that add emphasis to whoever is talking at any moment in time. These aren't exclusive to non-stop debates or even the trial segments, but I felt like I had to get this out because just look at this shit. Seriously, it looks so cool and it's just so nice and expressive, I love it. The rebuttal showdowns, they're pretty fucking cool too, and they are vastly improved from the second game. The sword slicing feels so much more intuitive thanks to various UI changes. The red vs blue dynamic, fighting for screen space, this looks so much better than the yellow mess that is Danganronpa 2's rebuttal showdowns. I also love the decision to lean even more into the obvious samurai inspiration all over this minigame. They bring out the katana designs and everything. Ayumi Sugita mentioned how very few people pay attention to user interfaces. And she's not wrong, she's actually just right. However, I saw this as one of the best aspects of this game. It'd be very easy for me to sit here and exclusively gush over character designs, but I genuinely really did like the UI in this game more than anything else visually. And I think it's a huge improvement over the previous games and took this game to the next level. Furthermore, I'll make a bold statement I may go on to regret at a later date. Danganronpa V3 sets a new standard for visual novels in terms of art and overall look. Of course, visual novels are far from the most profitable or well-funded games, so it's painfully obvious why this genre is starved of anything truly stunning. But none of that changes what V3 is. Analyzing graphic design, art, user interfaces, not really the specialty for a guy like me, but I know it looks damn good. And this game is that, a damn good looking game. This is V3's biggest strength and I'll never take it away from it. Is he really about to discuss class trial minigames? Doesn't he have something better to do? No. No, I do not.
Do I even need to explain this part of the video? It's non-stop debate. You get some truth bullets, you get a whole bunch of statements, you get some weak points, you take your metaphorical gun and get blasted over a statement you think is bullshit. Or you blast over a statement you think is correct. I love and adore this part of the game. Spike Chunsoft correctly recognizes that these debates are the cornerstone and the bread and butter of Danganronpa, and they keep it fun as they usually do. It's fun, it requires some thinking on your part, and sometimes it'll even be challenging. I'll just put it out there and say right now, Danganronpa V3 features the best debates in the entire series. I don't know that they're the best from a narrative or strict writing perspective, because that would require me to watch several hours of footage from 3 different games, but as a minigame, I don't think the first 2 iterations of Danganronpa come close to this level of polish and variety. One new aspect of V3's non-stop debates is the addition of the purging mechanic. In this game, you're actually allowed to turn truth bullets into lie bullets and use them to contradict someone else's statement during a debate. Usually, you'll only be required to do this about once a case. There are other opportunities to use these bullets. They're called back routes. Simply put, back routes are treated as an alternate path to pushing the trial forward. When considering the themes of Danganronpa V3 and how heavily it harps on truth versus lies, I think it's very fitting for there to be a lie bullet in the game. I'm actually very glad they added this mechanic. It really complements the story and the themes of this game. Being able to take back routes mid-trial is also a really great addition. I know critics complain that the back routes are dumb and simply nothing more than making other characters correct your lie, but my question to that is, so what? I think Shuichi not being a god for a couple seconds is perfectly acceptable, and if I recall correctly, within each trial there are 2 back routes at most, so it doesn't really break my suspension of belief or ruin the trial for me. The one problem I do have is how this game occasionally makes itself look dumb in an attempt to force the usefulness of this lying mechanic, particularly in Case 4. Maybe I read the situation wrong, but Case 4 is the biggest example of this. Like, we witnessed Tsumugi blatantly call out Shuichi's lie, but then gaslight herself into believing Shuichi, putting absolutely minimal pressure on his claims of being in the dining room. I theorized that maybe Tsumugi knew he was lying and decided to go with it, but this character is a can of worms I need not revisit. Other than me not always being fond of the application, I think the purging mechanic was a great addition to this game for both gameplay and story reasons. Mass panic debates are also a new feature in Danganronpa V3. It's basically Ayano Nakao asking, what if we made the player solve 3 different non-stop debates at once? And for as dumb as the concept sounds, I genuinely love the idea. These debates feel so overwhelming when you're new to them. The feeling of multiple people shouting at once actually feels oppressive, and having to find the one person speaking nonsense is a lot of pressure on top of your head. And it's impressive it accomplishes this, because developer accounts claim that this was a simplified version.
We had to take a lot away from the panic debate. We built the setup, and when we excitedly went to test, it was really hard to display different characters in 3 separate cameras and have the words come out of them. We removed a lot from it to not overload the game and had to release this oversimplified version. It was a difficult compromise.
Now, I won't deny, this mode is a teensy bit gimmicky, and I do lament what we could have gotten, but I think it's fine as is. It takes the tried and true formula of non-stop debates and adds a little twist, and I welcome it. Moving on, I figured I'm gonna rush through the next 3 minigames, as to not waste your time. I wanna skip to the cool shit too, but I figured I owed the viewer a review of every single minigame. Hangman's Gambit remains the most whatever minigame of all time. All you simply do is pick letters and spell out a word. I don't think there's a minigame in Danganronpa that makes me shrug my shoulders more than this one. Without a doubt, I've had my fair share of moments absolutely hating this game mode because of some words I was expected to spell out, but I've decided I'll be fair to the game and blame it on my low intelligence rather than calling the game mode outright shit. Psych Taxi is another one I fell under the mid category. You drive a taxi cab around collecting letters for a question, and you have to answer about 3 or 4 questions by the end. Really simple. Probably my bottom 3 minigames. My biggest issue is it just feels like this minigame takes forever. With any other mid or just outright bad minigame,
It's not nearly as painful because you can just realistically speed through them, but Psych Taxi, you're sort of just forced to sit there and take it. Also, hot take, I actually don't know if there's a hot take, I'm just talking out of my ass. Logic Dive absolutely clears Psych Taxi, and I won't be taking any disagreement on this front. Sorry, not sorry. And one of the better minigame additions to this game, Mind Mine. If I'm being honest, Mind Mine isn't really that good either. It's easy as fuck, and simply not difficult enough to encourage any player to approach it intelligently. However, that's also its biggest benefit. It's pretty simple, so you don't really have to waste too much time on it. Most of the agency is on you. It's not like Psych Taxi, which keeps you there forever, nor is it like debate scrums, which sort of don't engage you at all. Oh, speaking of debate scrums. Debate scrums. They fucking suck. Okay. I know you want an actual explanation, so let me give you that. Debate scrums are another new minigame introduced in Danganronpa V3. Whenever your class trial comes to a standstill and there's a split opinion, you will enter a debate scrum where characters from both sides will be made to debate the specifics on a particular subject. The problem with debate scrums comes down to two different issues for me. The first and more important issue is the actual mechanics of the minigame. Simply put, this is the most boring and easy minigame in the entire series. I will never forget the first time I played it. I was actually confused because of how simple it was. All you need to do is match keywords with a statement, and it's really that simple. And it's made doubly simple by the fact these keywords are almost always in said statement. The only time I mess up this minigame is when I'm not fully paying attention to the trial. After matching all the remarks and keywords, you enter a stage where you have to repeatedly press a button. Nigga, can you please tell me why I'm doing this? What is the point of doing this? It's just such an uninteresting and boring minigame. It requires no mechanical ability and doesn't require much thinking at all. The other issue I have with this is how uncreatively it's used. It's just more often than not used in a boring fashion. Could you imagine if we had a debate scrum where it was something like Shuichi is alone versus several classmates, with him having to defend his position by himself? I understand the point of debate scrums is that it's supposed to be a split opinion between two groups, usually even, but maybe you shouldn't have pigeonholed yourself into this? You know, giving yourself a little bit more flexibility here? It would probably help this dogshit game mode if you didn't have such strict rules and what triggered it to begin with. And to further expound upon my grievances about this minigame not being used creatively, I do want to make one thing clear. None of this would have solved the issues with this format, but at the very least, it would have made it more entertaining. And that's the main issue with debate scrums. There's nothing really entertaining or fun about them. They're just boring. Speaking of stuff that isn't boring, how about we discuss—
No, that's wrong!
Rebuttal Showdowns are my favorite minigames in the entire series, hands down. I love them in Danganronpa 2, but in V3, they are even better. Without a doubt, they are my favorite segments in every trial. There is nothing more raw than presenting your case, really laying everything out, and then suddenly, mid-sentence—
No can ignore that!
Rebuttal Showdowns are like mini boss battles within a trial. It's your opportunity to go one-on-one with someone else in a verbal joust. You destroy statements with your blade and wait for an opportunity to cut weak points of evidence. It's so fucking cool. I don't give a fuck how simple or easy they are. They're just an absurd power fantasy to me. Things are tensed amongst the students by the mere nature of you all being into the killing game, but there's something more personal and intimate about someone deciding to go mano-a-mano with you in front of the whole group. These segments are set up perfectly. It's so cinematic the way the character portrait just suddenly pops in, your screen literally crashing, breaking apart into a black screen, followed up by your classmates pontificating about how wrong they think you are. All this followed by a war of words with clearly samurai-inspired theme music in the background. I don't know if it's showing right now, but I'm in law school, so maybe I'm getting way too much enjoyment out of watching anime characters in a trial setting debate, but see if I fucking care, cause I don't. One of my favorite rebuttal showdowns has to be Kurumi's. Her rebuttal is everything I love about these minigames. I love her speech prior to the game's start where she calls your deductions an empty theory created from nihilism. Then there's the actual rebuttal. Kurumi actually presents counterarguments against you while also having flashes of emotional outbursts. For as professional and well-behaved as she is, she's clearly distraught at the accusation. Her sprite even shows it. It feels like I'm really fighting this bitch right now, and I like it. My biggest complaint with these rebuttal showdowns, and my only real complaint is, and listen to me closely, I wanted more. They're dope as fuck. Give me more. Transitioning out of my insane nerdgasm over rebuttal showdowns, here we have the most interesting minigame, Argument Armaments. If you haven't played Danganronpa, you may not believe a single thing I'm about to say out loud, but I'll go ahead anyway. Argument Armaments are rhythm games that progressively get harder the more you knock the boss's health bar down. As you whittle the boss's health bar down, they progressively lose their clothes in stages, until you are presented with a final argument in which if you manage to get the said refutation correct, said culprit basically becomes half naked.
No, nigga. No. No! No! No!
So basically, you're stripping someone to the beat of a rhythm game. Even in the context that these are teenagers, I'm not really offended at that per se. I just think it's absurd. I'm fully aware a major thing with Danganronpa is making a complete joke out of death, purposely minimizing it at times. Whether it be outlandish executions or flippant/childish ways some characters discuss others dying, this game isn't meant to be super serious all the time. But I don't know, I always thought this edition was just goofy and like unnecessarily fanservice-y, especially in the context of what's usually going on. When these armaments show up, that means shit's about to get real. Someone's probably about to get executed. So, don't you think the half-naked teenager might be a little bit distracting or out of place? I'm not trying to be a prude here, nor do I really seek out to like police fan service in games or anime. But like, during the armaments, I would hope you kept things a little bit more serious, but that's just me. Who fucking cares, man? I probably just incurred the wrath of 30,000 weeaboos who will surely type in the comments that it's just Japanese culture and that a filthy westerner like me could never understand and have no place to The actual game mode, we haven't really talked about that yet, have we? Well, it's a rhythm game. I've always found these to be an oddball addition to Danganronpa. On face value, they are really out of place and are nowhere in the same ballpark as the other minigames, but I don't hate them. It just adds to the variety of the available minigames and I'm not really mad about that. If anything, it's a positive addition. I'm not exactly great at these, but hey, I do think they're fun, so who cares? And there's no other fitting way to end off the minigame section than with the closing argument. Closing arguments are the conclusions to trials where you piece together what happened during an incident in a manga-style comic. You take panels of events and you drag them onto the comic, filling in the blanks. The closing argument is another aspect of this game that Spike Chunsoft has made minimal alterations or changes to. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It looks significantly better, and it's easier to navigate, but at its core, it's the same mode, and good on them for keeping it that way. I wish I could sit here and detail to you why I love this minigame, but come on, what is there to even say? After a whole trial of struggling for the truth, everything suddenly becomes clear to you, you get to piece it all together, you retell the crime exactly as it happened, and most importantly, you get to see your culprit break down completely as they're voted off inevitably. It's just an immensely satisfying cathartic end to a trial. Despite my numerous criticisms, I still contend that Danganronpa V3 has the best minigames in the entire series. The biggest advantage they have is their sheer variety. There's only one minigame I think is outright bad, and the rest range from mediocre to really good. Yeah, realistically, I'm only really in love with half of these, and indifferent towards the rest, but that's pretty acceptable. I believe the highs really do make up for the lows. And most of those low points can be speed run through and won't take too much time or brain power. You'll have plenty of time to enjoy the really good shit. I know these minigames aren't the reason why you, I, or anyone else plays this series, but I really do think they give Danganronpa character. And I simply can't resist that aspect of it.
Our first topic is this! Ta-da!
Danganronpa is a series marked by how much it revels in its own bizarre nature and relatively insane premise. This, alongside a cast of multifaceted and unique characters, requires a level of voice acting that goes above and beyond what we see in most video games. Danganronpa in particular feels double the pressure to perform in this category because it's a visual novel, meaning it lives and dies by its story, and by extension, it lives and dies by the voices featured in its story. So ultimately, does Danganronpa V3 do voice acting correctly?
Kaede, why? Why are you smiling like that? Why are you still trying to get me to be brave? Why, Kaede? Why are you thinking about everyone except yourself? If you had just been less selfless, you wouldn't have had to murder. Why? Why do you do that?
I'm sorry.
And in their second appearance in one of my videos, Cup of Tea Productions once again does an amazing job with the voice acting. I fear I'll be repeating many of my talking points from the 13 Sentinels video, but can you blame me? It's always the same thing with this particular production team. They localize Japanese games for an English audience and always manage to make a dub that is competitive with the Japanese one, and arguably sometimes even better. So when I was researching for this video and saw the production team, every question I had regarding this game's voice acting basically answered itself. Just like with the art section, it's really fucking hard to highlight any particular voice actor because all of them are good. I'm not even trying to be nice for the sake of it either, because you can tell from the length of this video and the content of the video, I'm not one who pulls punches. But there's just so many moments in the game where voice acting genuinely completes a moment or makes a character. For example, let me bring up Korekiyo. This guy is one of my least favorite characters in Danganronpa, but Todd Haberkorn's voice is his saving grace. Not only does Haberkorn just perfectly capture the weird and creepy nature that pervades Korekiyo's true nature, he manages to capture the full range of emotion too. I was not expecting this sort of acting during Korekiyo's breakdown.
Yes, you're right. Okay, I'll teach them.
What the hell are you mumbling about? You're giving me the goddamn willies!
Not yet. Nothing is clear at all. It's full of doubts, of mysteries, of a dense, impenetrable fog! Nothing is clear at all!
Seriously, Case 3 may suck, but Todd Haberkorn is giving his all and doing everything he can to save it. His performance sees him making the switch between the softer sound of Korekiyo's sister, a rattled version of the regular Korekiyo, and then just Korekiyo outright screaming. It's some sick acting on his part. Another voice worth noting is Kaiji Tang's rendition of Gonta Gokuhara. He's definitely one of my favorite voice actors, period, and his range is just continuing to impress me in every project I see him in. From the jump, I never expected to like Gonta at all, but Tang is truly the difference maker. Tang has the difficult task of taking what should be a joke character and making me take them serious, and he does it well, especially in Chapter 4.
Sorry. It's Gonta's fault everyone's so upset. But Gonta telling truth! Gonta really not culprit! 'Cause Gonta not know anything! Really!
Gonta, I'm going to look back at the whole case one more time, okay? When you're convinced, you just let me know, all right? Let's end this together.
Okay.
Good writing alongside this level of voice acting is what makes Gonta's death so difficult to accept. Personally, I've had my ups and downs with Miu as a character, but I'm entirely convinced she is single-handedly being saved by Wendy Lee's voice acting. Lee's decades of voice acting experience shines through and prevents Miu from becoming an extremely annoying character, which is honestly impressive considering how Miu was written.
Man, you're really plugged up. You're practically throbbing. Throbbing with dust and debris, that is. This is no good. No good at all. You
Why?
are so cranked up.
Lee also served as the voice director for this production, so that goes a long way to explain how every other character also had a perfect fit and well-casted voice. Another Moneyfolder video, another instance of Moneyfolder simping for Kira Buckland. Kiromi Tojo being voiced by Buckland is just perfect. I sincerely don't know who else could have captured the dignified and serious nature of this character. I especially love the accent she brings to this role. It's just perfection.
So please believe me, I am not the culprit. I do not care what becomes of me, but I will not allow any of you to die. Because I made a promise to Kaede. She wished for all of us to escape together. I want to fulfill my duties as the ultimate maid. I wish to serve everyone. So please believe me. You have to!
I can't really put my finger on it, but something about her voice just brings Kirumi to life, and is perhaps Kirumi's only saving grace. To be transparent, Buckland has been an important voice actor in at least 2 or 3 of my favorite games, so it's just not surprising I am head over heels for her voice work, but still, she does a great job in this game. And of course, there's just no way you people thought I was gonna go this whole section without mentioning Derek, Steph, and Prince, right? Prince may be a dick in real life, but the truth is, he is one of the best voice actors in this game. I've already played clips of Kokichi throughout this video, but can you blame me? Some of the best moments in this game can be directly credited to Kokichi and his voice.
This school is mine! I am the king! I, Kokichi Oma, am the mastermind and king of the ultimate academy for gifted juveniles! Yes! This world is mine!
Kokichi is a motherfucking villain. His role is solidified thanks to Prince's ability. That is just undeniable. Perhaps my biggest problem with the voice acting section lies in the fact that the voice acting is just too good. Since it's this Cup of Tea Productions, I ran into the same problem I ran into last time these fuckers produced a dub. I had too many positive things to say and not enough time. I was actually planning to showcase at least 10 different voices, but it just became so overwhelming and I realized the video was getting even longer than it already was. And sadly, what's ended up happening is that I feel really guilty because I didn't include a ton of people who did a great job. To end off this section, if my biggest complaint is that I don't have enough time to praise your work, then I hope you take solace in that fact and continue to do some wonderful things. Finally, we get to do one of my favorite parts of these analysis pieces. We get to talk about the music. And let's be real, when we talk about this series, when we talk about this game, do you even need to hear me discuss this? Come on, you already know what it is. You know exactly what you're getting into. Whenever I think about Danganronpa V3's soundtrack, there's always one fact, one aspect of it that blows me away. Composer Masafumi Takada handles music production by himself. I cannot find any evidence or official material that credits anyone else for the music on this soundtrack. There is precisely one exception to this, and it's the use of Debussy's Clair de Lune. And breaking news, Debussy died like 100 years ago, so Takada really did do this by himself. And I sincerely believe that's part of what makes the soundtrack of Danganronpa games so unique. No matter what changes, the one consistency is the composer's vision, and there is no third-party interference. This is just Takada's focus and vision, and it's allowed to shine through. And that's what makes the music in these games so impressive. It's not just their actual quality, it's the fact that one man could manage to do all of this by himself without any real major slip-ups. One of my favorite aspects of Takada continuing to be the sole composer for this series has to be the way he takes his own classic music, puts a spin on it, and then just makes it sound even better. It's to the point where I'm thinking V3 just outright has the best music in the series. And can you really blame me? Every single thing he makes is an improvement over the predecessor. My favorite example of this has to be Climax Reasoning. This is the theme that plays during the closing arguments of each case. It's meant to grant a sense of finality. It's you connecting the dots, and it's intended to serve as the final hurrah for the player. And well, for as much as I love Danganronpa 1, V3 wins this round. Not only is V3's version longer and a bit more varied in how it sounds, what's most impressive is how it changes the tone of the closing argument itself. The original Climax Reasoning harbors an almost victorious tone to it, as if it's a reward for finally getting to the trial, and now you get to expose the bad guy. But that's just not the case with V3's Climax Reasoning. This one sounds a lot more relaxed and maybe even downtrodden about it all. The piano adds a bit of sadness to it. It's actually mirroring the feelings of Shuichi. There is no protagonist in the series less able to accept the truth than him. And this more calm version of the Climax Reasoning reflects that change. You aren't nearly as excited to tell the truth, you're doing this reluctantly. Probably one of the most brilliant tracks, not just from a music standpoint, but from a narrative one. Rebuttal Showdowns also serve as a great example of this improvement I'm speaking of. I want you to see what the second game does versus what the first game does and try to deny my point about this improvement between games. I'm sorry, but V3's Rebuttal Showdown is just undeniably better. The slight change in instrumentation not only suits the trials better, it is so much more loyal to the samurai theme it's trying to capture, all while still sounding like it belongs in V3. And the investigation themes? This series has always had good investigation themes, so no one can ever agree on what's best. But listen, Ikarushia and Box 15 are pretty good, yeah? But as a counter-argument, have you not heard the themes of V3? But no, we can't simply settle on having one good investigation theme. We need to take your good investigation theme and turn it into the best investigation theme in the entire series. First off, the guitar riffs in this fucking track are insane. Second off, I didn't ask for those claps, but I am damn sure not complaining that we got them. Third off, he brings back the trumpets 2 minutes into the song alongside the guitar. My ears are climaxing, they are coming! And then there's just this game's affinity for perfectly placing tracks, always fitting to the mood at hand. One of the tracks that always gets this treatment is the piece called Real/Fiction, which is one of the most compelling pieces of music in the game. During this video, you've already seen it used in the Rantaro Ultimate reveal, but it just hits so hard in every place it's used. For example, let's go to the beginning of the game, the prologue, where we're introduced to Kaede.
This is me. My name is Kaede Akamatsu. I just remembered who I am. Nice to meet me. I'm the protagonist of this crazy story.
This track works so well because it's so attractive. It pulls you in, it's engaging, but at the same time, it's kind of off-putting and mysterious. It's as if everything you know about this world is wrong and is about to get turned upside down. Chapter 5's body discovery is one of the most bone-chilling and disturbing moments in the entire game, and this is largely thanks to the music that accompanies it. Shuichi and company arrive on scene expecting to save their friend, only to find an absolutely gruesome murder scene. I will never forget the feeling of despair that just overwhelmed me as Shuichi finally examines the monopad in this case. For me as the player, there is something especially disturbing about this discovery. Usually these monopads are only missing one important clue and are generally helpful towards figuring out who did a murder, but in this circumstance you get nothing. All you get is a black silhouette and some question marks. This, alongside the eerie music, is some of the most disturbing shit in the game. I can't help but appreciate how disciplined and patient this game is with its music. There's a lot of tracks, whether completely new or variations of the old, that just seem to always be used in the correct moment. For example, take one of my favorite tracks in the Danganronpa series, Sun or Solar. The actual names of tracks like these depend on who you ask, but I'm just gonna go with what the Amazon listing says. For me, this particular song serves as Makoto's theme, and always showed up during trials when he was having a breakthrough of some sort. Now, after over 35 hours of this song never rearing its head once in V3, let's see the situation in which it actually gets used.
I will not give up hope until the very end. We can't give up. No matter what, hope is always within reach. We must keep our heads high and search for hope, especially in deepest despair.
I love the use of the theme here. Not only did they save this song for the magnitude of the final class trial, they used it specifically for Kibo, which is thematically fucking awesome because the only other person who had this theme was the Ultimate Hope, but now the Ultimate Hope robot has it too. And to play this song precisely as Kibo is waking up, oh my god, this shit is good. The game really wants to fill you with hope before it inevitably fucks with you again and fills you with despair. And while we're on the subject of this game's masterful manipulation of emotions, what do you think this game does moments after Kiba wakes up playing the Ultimate Hope song and decides to remedy the situation. What do you think the game decides to do moments after?
Everything is going to be okay. We'll definitely find hope. What do you mean, hope? What? I reject that hope! I refuse. I won't accept that hope.
Shuichi, what's the matter?
It's because of hope that this whole thing is happening! I reject that hope!
Clair de Lune is a song that was so specifically saved for key moments, and to hear it played in this specific moment while Shuichi's rejecting hope is so heart-wrenching. No matter how many times I rewatch this scene or replay this game, my throat always gets a little tight watching this. I get choked up, and the signs of a man about to cry creep up on me. What an unbelievably emotionally potent and intelligent moment to play this specific song. Killing Harmony's soundtrack is great because it has self-awareness. Masafumi Takada is aware of the type of franchise Danganronpa is, and his music plays a big role in shaping that. This soundtrack in particular knows when to be deadly serious, it knows how to perfectly capture this game's silliest moments, and it also has some of the grooviest music in the franchise. In the art section, I specifically said that this game's greatest strength was its art. Upon further reflection, I think I was wrong, and it might actually just be the music. Yes, I am contradicting myself in my own video, but can you blame me? During the process of making this video, I was so sure of my opinion on this game, but when I got to the music section, I was very sincerely considering renaming this video I Was Wrong About Danganronpa V3. Takada's music in this game actually manipulated my emotions so well I nearly changed my tune on this game altogether. That is some powerful shit, so hats off to you. This soundtrack not only does its job, it excels. Danganronpa V3 is a frustrating game, a disappointing visual novel, and an infuriating experience. At the beginning of this video, I asked a very simple question. What makes Danganronpa V3 such an infuriating experience? The answer to this question is pretty simple, but it might have been obfuscated by the sheer amount of praise I actually did give to this game. But the reason why Danganronpa V3 infuriates me so much comes down to wasted potential and missed opportunities. It's very disappointing that this game quite literally improves over its predecessors in almost every aspect and every department except the one that matters the most, its story. This is the best the game has ever looked. I'm in love with the character designs, the sprites are expressive, and the UI is to die for. The soundtrack is consistently on par or outright superior to the first two games and has a serious argument for being the best aspect of this game. The voice acting is stunning across the board, with near perfectly casted actors for each character. And with all I've talked about and all the time I had making this video, this is without me mentioning the other cool shit about this game, like the shit tons of side content it offers with free time events and entirely new game modes, all with the goal of keeping the most dedicated fans entertained. For all intents and purposes, this should be the definitive Danganronpa. They mastered almost everything about the formula and gameplay loop. So to see it all be almost wasted because of a bad story is just depressing. The most important part of this game at the end of the day is the tale it tells. And unfortunately, there's just way too many low points for me to have this as my favorite game in the series. My final rating for Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony is a 7 out of 10. And regardless the vibe I give off, the rating I just delivered, or what the title of this video says, this is a good game. It's not bad, it's not shit, it's not below average, it's not even average. This game is good. I can clearly see the passion that went into this project and that everyone working on this clearly had intentions to make something special. And in fact, testimonies from those who worked in the game all show this sentiment. Kodaka bragged about how he feels this game was his masterpiece and that he doesn't even know how he'd continue the series from this point. And good for him. Despite my criticisms, it makes me insanely happy that Kodaka and his team made something quality, and they have nothing to be ashamed of. The fact they put everything they could into this game only encouraged me to want to break down everything I loved and hated about this game even more. For me, art like this deserves genuine critique. This franchise isn't some cash grab yearly AAA release, nor is it shovelware designed to waste your time. I really do respect this game and the people behind it. It's just a travesty that this is the end result. I sincerely believe there's a near masterpiece visual novel hidden in this game's DNA, despite how it turned out. And if Danganronpa 4 really is in our future, I'm confident in the ability of Spike Chunsoft to deliver something truly stunning. But until that release, I think I'm going to continue lamenting what could have been. Thank you for watching.